Hey guys, tonight we're not talking about storms or shipwrecks. We're talking about the most terrifying force the sea can unleash. A medieval tsunami. You've seen tidal waves in movies, towering walls of water smashing modern cities. But in the Middle Ages, you're on a leaking wooden coffin with no warning, no science, no escape. The ocean pulls back. The horizon rises like a moving mountain, and before you can even pray, it comes down like the hand of God. This isn't survival. It's obliteration. This is why you wouldn't survive a medieval tsunami at sea. And by the end of tonight, you'll never think of the tide the same way again. But first, if you'd like to help keep the lanterns lit around here and support the deeply unsustainable caffeine addiction that fuels these midnight rabbit holes, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link pinned in the comments. No pressure at all, but every cup helps delay the caffeine-induced heart failure we all know is coming. But before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. Congrats, you're on a medieval ship. The good news, you're not drowning yet. The bad news, you will. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, you're standing on the deck of what some overly optimistic shipwright called a seaworthy vessel. To your eyes, it looks less like an achievement of human engineering and more like a pile of badly nailed together planks with a sail slapped on top. You can hear the ship complaining already every board groans with each swell. Every nail loosens with every creak. When the wind sighs through the rigging, the ropes moan like old bones. You'll notice immediately that nothing here feels permanent. Not the tar that was smeared between the planks to keep the sea out, which is already flaking away in oily chunks. Not the masts, which sway as if they're one stiff breeze away from snapping. Certainly not the faith of the men who built this coffin with sails, who probably didn't expect it to last the season. Your boots are already wet because the deck leaks from below as much as the sky leaks from above. The bilge down beneath, that dark, hellish pit where the lowest-ranking sailors are condemned to scoop water into buckets, never dries out. There is no moment on this ship when the sea isn't already halfway inside it. The whole contraption survives only because it hasn't yet made up its mind whether to float or sink. Inside, the quarters are no better. Cabin is too kind a word for what is essentially a wooden box reeking of mold, fish guts, and human despair. The air is so thick with the mingled scents of sweat, urine, and spoiled food that you taste it before you breathe it. Privacy does not exist. You sleep shoulder to shoulder with men who snore, cough, and mutter to themselves, and each one carries a personal army of lice and fleas who make sure you never forget their presence. The floor is always damp, and the straw bedding provided is a sodden sponge that smells faintly of rot. You'll learn to love the deck despite the whipping winds and cold spray, because at least above board, the air moves enough to trick you into thinking you can breathe. And then there is the noise. The ship is alive with sounds that will become your lullaby and your alarm. Timbers shriek, ropes slap, and the endless crash of waves against the hull is a drumbeat you never escape. At night, rats skitter across your face, their claws tiny razors as they scramble toward sacks of flour or barrels of dried fish. You'll curse them, but they'll survive this voyage better than you will. Rats never drown, or so it seems. The ship doesn't ride the waves so much as it flails against them, pitching violently enough to remind you of your place in the pecking order of existence. The sea is a giant, and you are less than a flea scratching at its surface. Every roll tosses you into walls, barrels, or other equally miserable passengers. You clutch whatever's nearest and pray your stomach doesn't betray you again, though it will, because the rolling is constant and cruel. Seasickness is your new religion, a devotion that empties your stomach until you're begging for death, or at least for dry land. Unfortunately, the land is weeks away, if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, it's under the water already, waiting to rise up in a wave tall enough to snap your pathetic ship in half. This vessel, like most of its kind, was built for trade, not comfort, and certainly not survival. It carries wool, grain, or maybe pilgrims clutching their relics and muttering about salvation. What it does not carry is any real protection against the fury of the sea. There are no lifeboats, no life preservers, no emergency plan beyond screaming prayers to a God who, judging by the design of the ship beneath you, doesn't particularly like sailors. The best you have is a plank to cling to if the inevitable happens, and even then, you'll probably die faster clinging to it than letting go. Your captain struts as if he commands the ocean, but in truth he commands little more than fear. His knowledge of navigation is a blend of superstition and guesswork. He reads the stars when they appear, but when the clouds smother the sky, he guesses by the color of the water or the cries of seabirds. You would like to believe he knows where he is going, but when you ask, his eyes dart toward the horizon with a nervous twitch. He doesn't trust the ship any more than you do. He just hides it better. Down in the hold, cargo shifts with every wave, barrels rolling, crates smashing against the hull. You can hear the constant grind of wood against wood as the ship struggles to hold itself together under the weight. Sometimes, in the dark, you'll hear a crack loud enough to stop your heart, only for the ship to sigh and settle again. You never know which creak is just wood adjusting, and which one is the start of your watery grave. The smell of tar seeps into your clothes, your hair, your very skin. It mixes with the stink of men who haven't bathed in weeks and don't care. Lice crawl at the seams of your tunic, and if you scratch too hard, you'll open sores that fester. Infection is a constant companion here, the sort that starts with a scratch and ends with fever and delirium. You might die before the wave even arrives, and nobody will bother tossing your corpse overboard until the stench makes them gag. You start to wonder why anyone boards a ship at all. The promise of trade, the call of pilgrimage, the hope of new lands. None of it matters when the sea itself is your enemy, patient and relentless. You realize quickly that the ocean doesn't care why you're here. It doesn't care about your prayers or your bargains or your fear. It wants to swallow you, and this creaking, leaking contraption you call a ship is little more than bait on the tongue of a monster. But for now, you're still alive. You clutch the railing, watch the horizon sway, and tell yourself this ship will hold together one more day. You laugh nervously at the creaks, ignore the leaks, and convince yourself that men have survived worse. After all, people have been sailing for centuries, haven't they? That means you'll be fine, doesn't it? The good news, you're not drowning yet. The bad news, the ocean is patient, and it always gets what it wants. Your vessel is a coffin with sails. That's not an insult, it's a fact. The people who built it thought of it as a marvel of craftsmanship, but the truth is, it's a barely floating wooden box with a mast and a prayer nailed to it. Depending on where and when you're unlucky enough to be, you might find yourself on a cog, a caravel, or a longship, each one with its own flavors of misery, but all sharing the same certainty. They were never meant to keep you comfortable, and they were never built with survival in mind. They exist for trade, conquest, and faith. They exist to move goods and bodies from one dangerous coastline to another, and if a few of those bodies slip into the sea along the way, that's just the price of doing business. Take the cog, that proud northern workhorse of the medieval seas. On paper, it sounds impressive. A broad-bellied cargo ship with a single mast and a square sail, built to carry wool, timber, or perhaps even soldiers. In reality, it's a floating compromise, designed to haul as much as possible while giving the illusion of sturdiness. Its sides are tall, its bottom flat, which makes it stable in calm waters, but turns it into a toy for the waves when the sea grows restless. The square sail does its job only when the wind behaves, which is to say almost never, so you're left swaying helplessly as currents drag you off course. The rudder, an invention still in its awkward adolescence, responds with all the grace of a stubborn mule. Try to turn the ship quickly, and you'll feel the whole vessel resist, as though it too would rather not test its luck against the sea. You stand on the deck of a cog and feel secure for a moment, until the first storm blows in and you realize the high sides that promised safety are now a canvas for every crashing wave that wants to hurl you overboard. Or perhaps you're packed onto a caravel, one of those sleek little vessels from the Iberian coast, praised for their agility and daring voyages into the unknown. With their triangular lateen sails, caravels can cut across the wind, a neat trick that makes them the darling of explorers. But agile is just a polite way of saying small and unstable. A caravel rides the water like a nervous horse, nimble but easily spooked. It rocks violently with every change in the waves, tossing crew and passengers alike into heaps of bruised limbs and curses. Below deck, space is laughably tight. You crouch in a low-ceilinged hold with no ventilation, pressed against cargo and sweating bodies, while above you, the ship reels like a drunkard. The captain praises its speed and maneuverability, but speed means nothing when the ocean rises taller than the mast. Agility is useless when you are specks at the mercy of a storm. And then there are the longships, those narrow, menacing shapes carved by the Norse. They are faster, lighter, and more graceful than either cog or caravel, but that only makes them better at delivering men into danger. A longship has no deck to speak of, just open benches for the oarsmen and a hull so shallow it can skim across rivers as easily as seas. That shallowness, however, means the ocean is always a fingertip away, sloshing over the sides to soak you until your bones ache with cold. Sailors on a longship sit exposed to the elements for days, their backs bent over oars, their skin blistered by sun and frozen by spray. These ships were designed for speed and raiding, not for comfort, and certainly not for surviving tsunamis. When the sea decides to rise up in fury, the longship offers no protection, only a front-row seat to your drowning. No matter which vessel you find yourself on, safety is a fiction. There are no lifeboats, no flotation devices, no clever system of ropes and pulleys waiting to save you when disaster comes. A storm or rogue wave is not an emergency to be prepared for, but a sentence to be endured. If the ship capsizes, you cling to wood and hope, but hope doesn't float. You'll flail until exhaustion drags you under, or the cold numbs you into silence. Those who built these vessels did not design them with your survival in mind. They built them with cargo and conquest in mind. You are cargo too, whether you admit it or not. Discomfort is constant. The decks are slick with seawater and slime, the planks never dry, and the smell of rot seeps into every breath. On a cog, you might find yourself jammed between barrels of salted fish, rats gnawing holes through the staves, while their offspring crawl into your blanket at night. On a caravel, the hold is so low you spend half your life bent in half, your spine aching, your skull bumping beams as you try not to collapse into the filth on the floor. On a longship, there is no hold at all, just open air, where every wave slaps salt into your eyes and every gust of wind freezes the sweat on your neck. Sleep is a joke told in bad taste. You doze in snatches, waking at every lurch of the hull, at every shout of the crew, at every crash of wave against timber. The instability of these ships is not just physical but psychological. You never trust them, not really. You hear the creaks in the night and wonder if the wood will split. You feel the sway under your feet and wonder how long it can last before the sea swallows it whole. Even the sailors who spend their lives aboard them don't trust them. They whisper prayers and charms, hang amulets from the rigging, mutter about angry gods and restless spirits. Their superstition is not quainted as survival. because they know better than you do that these ships are not homes, nor refuges, nor havens. They are coffins that haven't closed their lids yet, and yet you stand on one, clinging to its railing, daring to believe it will hold. The sail snaps overhead, the mast sways, the hull groans, and you tell yourself this is normal, this is fine, this is what sailing is supposed to feel like. You ignore the way your stomach turns, the way your ears ring with the endless pounding of water, the way every gust of wind feels like a warning. You tell yourself that men have crossed seas in these ships before, that they reached distant shores and lived to tell about it. But the ocean doesn't care about your history lessons. To the sea, your cog, your caravel, your longship, they're all the same. Fragile toys, planks lashed together. Little wooden boxes carried like driftwood until the sea decides otherwise. And when the sea decides otherwise, you'll learn what a coffin is really for. Congratulations, you've found yourself among your shipmates. The good news, you are not alone on this rotten voyage. The bad news, the people and creatures you're sharing this vessel with are somehow worse than the ship itself. You imagined comrades, hardy sailors with steady hands and songs on their lips, perhaps even a sense of unity in the face of the sea's violence. What you've actually inherited is a pack of parasites, pirates, merchants, mercenaries, and vermin, all bound together not by loyalty, but by desperation. Your ship is their cage, their battlefield, their tavern, and their latrine all at once, and you must live elbow to elbow with them as long as you can endure it. Start with the sailors, since they are the true rulers here. They are not the clean-cut heroes of murals and legends, but scarred men with cracked teeth and sun-leathered skin, whose fingernails are permanently blackened from tar and filth. Their knowledge of the sea is impressive, but it comes at a cost. They know too much about the ocean's indifference to pretend its civility. They spit when they talk, they curse when they laugh, and their tempers flare like flint against steel. When you stumble across the deck, one will snarl at you for being in the way. Another will shove you aside with the weight of someone who has spent years in cramped quarters and has long since forgotten what personal space means. They scratch constantly because lice have claimed them as permanent tenants, and they reek of sweat, salt, and stale beer. You want to believe they are your protectors, but they are not here for you. They are here for their wages, their rum, and their chance at survival, same as you. The merchants are a different breed, though no less unpleasant. They've squeezed themselves and their precious goods onto the same floating coffin as you, determined to deliver bolts of wool, spices, or barrels of wine to distant markets. They scowl at every drop of seawater that splashes across their cargo, wailing louder over a soaked sack of flour than they ever would for a drowned crewmate. To them, the ship is not a vessel but a gamble, and every storm, every tilt of the deck, threatens their profit. They eye you not as a fellow passenger, but as one more mouth to drink from the dwindling barrel, one more liability they didn't account for. In the dark of the hold, they'll even guard their crates like sleeping dragons, muttering suspicions about thieves in every shadow. The irony, of course, is that the sea doesn't care how much they hoard or protect. When the waves rise, their wealth is as worthless as yours. Then come the mercenaries, the sword-for-hire men who treat the voyage as another campaign. Their armor is rusted, their blades nicked, but their confidence is ironclad. They brag loudly about battles fought, enemies slaughtered, fortresses burned. When not boasting, they're gambling, shouting, or threatening each other over dice rolls. To them, the ship is just another tavern, and every tavern must have a fight. They drink until they vomit, brawl until their knuckles split, then laugh and clap each other's backs like nothing happened. The sailors despise them, the merchants fear them, and you wedged between them on sleepless nights learn that a man with a sword is never fully asleep, not when the sea is full of excuses to draw it. But the worst companions of all are the ones no one invited, the rats. They are everywhere. They scurry in the shadows, squeeze through cracks in the hull, and nest in the grain sacks. Their teeth click through wood and cloth alike, and their greasy tails whip across your face as you try to sleep. They gnaw through ropes, chew holes in your clothing, and bite at your feet if you don't keep them tucked under your blanket. Every night, you hear them squealing in the dark, fighting over scraps of fish bones and crumbs of bread, their numbers swelling as the voyage drags on. You dream of land, of escape from this infestation, only to wake and find one perched on your chest, staring at you with glassy black eyes, daring you to move. And yet the rats are only a symptom. Everything crawls here. Lice infest every scalp, burrowing into hair and laying eggs with relentless efficiency. Fleas hop from skin to skin, raising welts and spreading sickness. You scratch until your arms bleed, but the itching never stops, and your torment becomes the background noise of life at sea. Hygiene is not a word that exists in this world. Bathing is impossible, and changing clothes is a luxury you don't have. The same shirt soaks in your sweat, your vomit, and the sea's brine until it stiffens into a crusted second skin. Your hair mats with grease, your gums bleed from rot, and your breath could peel paint if paint had ever touched this vessel. Everyone stinks, and the air itself seems to rot with you. This lack of cleanliness feeds tempers. When every man is tired, hungry, and itching with parasites, every glance becomes an insult, every bump a provocation. Fights break out over scraps of bread, over stolen sips of ale, over whose turn it is to bail water from the leaking hull. The mercenaries swing fists and knives, the sailors throw punches hardened by rope and rigging, and the merchants squeal in protest, clutching their goods as though a brawl might spill into their barrels. Sometimes it does. Blood mixes with seawater on the deck, and you learn quickly that on a medieval ship, there are no real consequences for violence. There are no brig cells, no courts, no guards to separate combatants. There is only the sea, and sometimes a body goes overboard, whether by accident or design. And through all of it, you endure. You squeeze yourself into a corner of the hold, breathing through your mouth to dull the stench, scratching yourself raw as the vermin feast on you, hoping no sailor trips over you in his drunken stumble, hoping no mercenary mistakes your silence for weakness. You pretend that this is survivable, that the voyage is temporary, that there is an end to this floating nightmare. But deep down, you know the truth. You are part of a menagerie of parasites, human and otherwise, all clawing at one another for scraps of comfort while the ocean waits outside, vast and patient. Because the sea doesn't care who you are, merchant or mercenary, sailor or stowaway, rat or louset, will take you all the same. The good news, there is food on board. The bad news, you'll wish there wasn't. Hunger is a cruel master, but the meals you're about to endure might make starvation look like a reasonable alternative. Welcome to the culinary delights of medieval seafaring, where the menu is fixed, the ingredients are rotten, and the cooks have no choice but to serve you death slowly, one rancid biscuit at a time. You thought the sea itself was the enemy, but the first battle you'll fight is with your stomach, and it's a battle you're destined to lose. Your main course is hardtack, the infamous sailor's biscuit. It's not bread as you know it, soft and fragrant, but a brick disguised as food. Flour and water, baked until it becomes as unyielding as stone, then stored for months in damp barrels until mold, weevils, and cockroaches take up permanent residence. By the time you pry one out, it is less a meal and more a museum exhibit of infestation. You don't bite hardtack so much as break your teeth against it. Sailors joke that you need a hammer to crack it, and they're not wrong. The usual trick is to soak it in ale or soup until it softens, but soaking doesn't remove the worms crawling through its chalky flesh. It only drowns them, and when you lift the biscuit to your lips, there they are white, squirming, alive, wriggling between your teeth before you can even chew. You learn quickly not to eat in daylight. In darkness, at least you can pretend the crunch in your mouth is flour and not larvae. The next delicacy is salted fish, At first glance, it seems like a godsend. Protein, preserved for long voyages, a taste of the sea on the sea. But preservation in this era means burying the fish in mountains of salt until it becomes desiccated and leathery, impossible to chew without soaking it for hours. Even then, it is not safe. The longer it sits in barrels, the more it rots beneath the crust of salt, filling with worms and reeking of decay. You gag as you try to tear a strip free, your jaw aching from the effort, your tongue recoiling at the taste of rancid oil. Sometimes you manage to choke it down, sometimes you vomit it back up. Either way, the sea reclaims it, because the ship has no patience for your delicate stomach. What goes down or comes up, it all ends in the brine. Fresh food is a luxury that disappears almost immediately. If livestock was brought aboard, it dies or is slaughtered within days, the meat consumed before it rots in the heat. Vegetables wilt, fruit bruises and blackens, bread molds, cheese grows blue and green with fungus. Soon, all you have are barrels of biscuits, casks of salted fish, and whatever insects and rodents can be trapped and eaten in desperation. Rats are abundant, scurrying in the hold and gorging themselves on the same provisions you're meant to survive on. Some sailors catch them and roast them, the smell of burning fur filling the ship before the meat is stripped from bones. Others gag at the thought, but you stop gagging eventually. Hunger changes your mind faster than any sermon. And then there is the matter of drink. You assume water will sustain you, but water turns quickly in wooden casks. Within days it becomes slimy, full of algae, stinking of rot. Drinking it is as dangerous as drinking seawater. The solution is beer, thin and sour, brewed weak enough to be guzzled in gallons without killing you outright. It slakes your thirst for a time, but it is no substitute for clean water, and it leaves you perpetually half drunk, staggering across the deck as much from ale as from waves. The stronger drink, if you can get it, is wine, but wine too goes sour, turning to vinegar as the voyage drags on. You drink it anyway. Anything is better than the taste of cask water slime. Hunger gnaws at you even when you eat. The rations are meager, never enough to leave you satisfied, and the effort of laboring on the ship burns more than you consume. Your stomach contracts into a knot, grumbling through the night, until pain becomes your only companion. Weakness sets in, not suddenly but insidiously, one missed nutrient at a time. Your legs ache, your gums bleed, your teeth loosen in your mouth. Cuts refuse to heal, bruises bloom black and purple and linger for weeks. You're not just hungry, you're diseased. Scurvy has claimed you long before the ocean does, stripping your strength, turning your body into a sack of brittle bones and failing flesh. And so, you eat what you can, when you can, however foul it may be. You break open a biscuit, watch the maggots squirm, close your eyes and bite anyway. You gnaw a strip of fish, worms and all, telling yourself the salt masks the flavor when it doesn't. You sip ale until your head swims, not from joy but from survival, because without it your throat would be too dry to choke down another meal. Every day you eat less than you need. Every day you weaken. The crew doesn't complain because this is life at sea. They curse, they spit, they joke about their meals, but they swallow them just the same. No one expects comfort here. You don't voyage to thrive. You voyage to endure. And in the endurance, the human body reveals how much filth it can process before it finally breaks. You begin to understand why sailors look like half corpses before they've even reached land, their eyes sunken, their skin sallow, their teeth missing. The sea doesn't just drown you. It starves you, rots you, hollows you out until you're already a ghost before the waves rise. And that's the cruelest part. Long before the tsunami comes to claim you, long before you see the wall of water racing toward your helpless ship, you are already defeated. Your body is too weak to fight, too brittle to climb, too sick to resist. Your bones ache, your belly is empty, your blood is thin, and your soul is tired. You think you will die in a single glorious instant, swallowed by the sea's fury. But the truth is simpler and far more pitiful. The sea doesn't need the wave to kill you. It's already doing the job, one rancid biscuit at a time. The good news: the sky is above you. The bad news: you have no idea what it means. In your world, satellites and Doppler radar spin storms into colorful maps, and weather apps ding notifications with smug precision. In the medieval world, the forecast is a sailor squinting at clouds and muttering about demons, and the only map you'll get is the one some monk doodled with ink and prayer. You are on a fragile ship in an endless sea, and the people around you are convinced the heavens are a kind of cryptic mood ring. They don't predict the weather. They guess, they argue, and when they're wrong, they drown. If the sky glows red at dawn, some swear it means storms. Others declare it's a blessing, a heavenly torch guiding them forward. When gulls wheel inland, one sailor mutters about tempests, while another insists it just means fish are swimming closer to shore. A falling star streaks across the night, and suddenly the deck brims with superstition. Half the crew makes the sign of the cross. The other half mutters pagan charms older than Christianity itself. To you, it's a meteor. To them, it's a divine warnigor, a promise of fortune. Either way, it means nothing, because the storm is coming regardless. The captain is no scientist. He's a man with a cracked astrolabe, a sunburnt face, and a pouch full of coins that say he's been lucky more often than not. He trusts the stars, but not as you imagine. Not patterns of air pressure and currents, but literal stars' constellations, planets, wandering points of light he swears whisper truths. When Mars burns red, he warns of war on land. When Saturn shines bright, he mutters about famine. None of this helps you when clouds smother the sky and every celestial guide disappears behind a wall of gray. At that point, the captain shrugs and the prayers begin. Prayers are the forecast most days. The crew chants before meals, mutters before sleep, and kneels whenever the sea looks even slightly meaner than usual. God, saints, angels, the Virgin, they all get their share of desperate pleas. But you notice something unsettling. The louder the prayers, the worse the fear. When sailors fall to their knees and cling to rosaries, when mercenaries suddenly remember childhood hymns, when even the rats seem to scurry in unnatural panic, you know something awful is brewing. The forecast isn't a prediction of safety. It's an announcement of doom. Not that they admit it. Sailors are stubborn creatures, and fear makes them delusional. They convince themselves the strange stillness in the air is calm, not the breath before the seas scream. They point at halos around the moon and call them good omens, though you can feel in your gut their warnings. The wind dies, the sails sag, and the ocean flattens into eerie glass. But instead of recognizing the terror in this silence, they grin and gamble with dice, too scared to admit the truth. The sea is playing dead. That never ends well. Superstition is their shield. When the horizon darkens, they spit over the side to appease spirits. When lightning flickers, they whisper charms against witches riding the storm. They tie knots in ropes as talismans, paint crude crosses on barrels, hang animal bones in the rigging. You watch them shiver as thunder cracks, and instead of reefing sails or securing cargo, they argue about whether the storm is punishment for someone's sins. You begin to realize that safety measures are scarce not because they lack skill, but because they are blinded by belief. To them, waves are not waves. They are omens, punishments, curses, and no man can fight curses. If someone sneezes, they fear pestilence. If someone has a nightmare, they whisper about drowned ancestors clawing their way up from the seabed. The line between weather and witchcraft is paper thin. When the swell begins to rise, when clouds bruise black and roll low enough to scrape the mast, you hear whispers that a sorcerer is among you. They eye strangers suspiciously. They eye you. Maybe you brought this storm. Maybe your sins called it down. Maybe your very presence has angered God. They would throw you overboard in an instant if it meant saving themselves. You can't argue meteorology to people who believe Neptune is real and angry. And when the omens finally line up, when the wind howls, the rigging screams, and the heavens split open with rain, they act not with reason, but with resignation. The storm is here, they declare. The saints did not protect them. The stars lied. The charms failed. Their forecast is simple. The sea will take who it will, and no man's strength can alter fate. They grip ropes with cracked hands, lash themselves to masts, and howl psalms into the wind, as though their voices might bargain with the abyss. You realize there is no plan. There is only endurance. The cruelest part is that storms in this age do not always strike suddenly. Signs gather for hours, sometimes days. Shifts in the swell, strange colors in the sunset, the taste of iron on the tongue when lightning coils unseen. But they do not see them as science. They see them as riddles, and riddles don't keep ships afloat. The wave is coming, the sky tells them so, but they read it backward, mistaking doom for blessing until it's too late. By the time the first monstrous gust tears through the sails, by the time the first crack of thunder rattles your bones, you understand that ignorance is not bliss. It is a death sentence written in water and wind. And here you are, trapped on a ship with no compass beyond superstition, no charts beyond faded stars, and no protection beyond words shouted at the heavens. You look at the sky. You feel the shifting air. You hear the groan of the sea as it swells beneath you. You recognize the danger, but no one around you does. They cling to signs and prayers, blind to the truth. You want to scream at them to reef the sails, to batten down, to prepare, but they will not listen, because in their eyes, this isn't weather, it's fate. The good news, the ocean is quiet. The bad news, it isn't supposed to be. Out here, hundreds of miles from anything resembling land, the sea is a restless animal, always moving, always whispering, always sighing. Waves slap the hull with monotonous persistence. Wind tugs at the rigging, gulls squawk overhead. Even when storms rage, there is a rhythm to it, a violent music that never fully ceases. But now the music has stopped, and the silence that follows is louder than thunder. The sails droop like dead skin, their once proud billows sagging into flaccid sheets. The ropes stop humming, the mast ceases its groan, and the whole ship feels like a puppet abandoned by its master. The water itself looks unnatural, not a ripple, not a wavelet, not even the gentle swell you've grown used to. Just a great, slick plain of dark glass stretching to the horizon, reflecting the sky so perfectly it seems you're adrift in a void, floating between two identical abysses. The crew murmurs uneasily, but no one dares speak the obvious. Something is wrong. You notice the absence before you realize what it means. The gulls are gone. For days they've circled and screamed, fighting over scraps tossed overboard, wheeling above the mast in perpetual chaos. Now, nothing. The sky is empty. No cries, no feathers drifting, no distant shadows beating against the light. Even the rats in the hold have gone strangely quiet, abandoning their usual skittering racket for a silence that feels rehearsed, like they've all agreed on something you haven't yet understood. The world has inhaled, and it refuses to exhale. The sailors squint at the horizon, scratching beards and muttering explanations. One insists this means fortune, a gift from God, a rare calm before safe passage. Another argues it's merely a quirk of currents, a trick of the tide. A third insists it's proof that prayers were answered, that the saints are smiling. None admit the knot in their stomachs. They cover dread with bravado, spitting superstitions like seeds on dry earth, hoping one will grow into truth. But you can feel the lie in their voices. You can taste the fear. Even the air feels wrong. It hangs heavy and damp, pressing down on you like a sodden blanket. You draw a breath, but it doesn't feel like air. It feels like water, waiting for permission to become liquid. The smell is off too. Not the usual salt and rot of the sea, but something metallic, sharp. A scent like iron nails driven into wet wood. Your tongue tastes it, your throat clings to it, and you know without knowing how that storms do not smell like this. This is something else, something worse. You try to imagine explaining this to a modern mind, someone spoiled by weather apps and barometers. But in this age, there is no explanation, only interpretation. The men pace the deck, peering up at the sky, whispering about omens. They argue whether the Virgin's intercession has calmed the winds or whether devils have stolen them. A few whisper that the sea has gone quiet because it is listening, that the depths themselves have ears and are waiting for something unspeakable. You watch their faces, pale and drawn, lit by an unnatural stillness. They're pretending not to be afraid, but the silence is eating them alive. The captain pretends to know better. He squints at the horizon, hands behind his back, lips pressed tight. But the confidence he wears like armor has cracked. His orders are hollow, routine commands barked for the sake of keeping discipline. Adjust the ropes, scrape the deck, check the barrels. Pointless work. He knows, as they all know, that nothing is normal. A ship with no wind is a body with no breath. It isn't alive, and it isn't dead. It's waiting. That waiting is the worst part. Minutes stretch into hours, each one heavier than the last. No breeze to cool you, no waves to rock you, no gulls to distract with their ceaseless cries. Just heat and silence, and the oppressive feeling that you are being watched not by men, not by God, but by the sea itself. Every creak of wood feels louder. Every splash from an oar dropped in the hold sounds like thunder. You startle at nothing, jump at shadows, feel your skin prickle at touches of air that may not even exist. By dusk, the calm has curdled into dread. The sun sinks into the horizon, staining the sky in lurid reds and oranges that seem less like beauty and more like a wound. The sailors mutter about blood skies, about warnings painted across the heavens. Some fall to their knees, muttering prayers. Others drink themselves into stupors, preferring oblivion to silence. The rats, you notice, have not returned. Perhaps they know what's coming. Perhaps they are wiser than men. You lie awake through the night, if sleep can be called what you manage. The ship sits as still as stone, unmoving, unshifting, like it has been nailed to the sea floor. Stars burn above you, clear and cold, but their beauty feels cruel. The men whisper in the dark, voices drifting like smoke. One tells a story of a ship swallowed whole by a single wave, vanishing without a trace. Another insists the sea sometimes pauses before it takes its prey, as though savoring the moment. The silence stretches, and you cannot tell if the creaks in the hull are wood settler bones, preparing to break. Morning comes, and the silence remains. The air presses harder, heavy with something you cannot name. You feel it in your chest, in your teeth, in the marrow of your bones. A presence, a weight. The ocean is no longer a body of water. It is a living thing holding its breath, and you are balanced precariously on its tongue. The crew goes about its chores, but slower now, each motion dulled by fear. No one laughs. No one sings. Their eyes dart constantly to the horizon, waiting for something they cannot imagine. And then, just when the stillness seems unbearable, a ripple disturbs the water. Tiny at first, almost delicate, as though a finger has dragged lightly across the surface of the sea. The sailors freeze, their eyes following the disturbance as it grows, spreading outward in impossible patterns. The air shifts, just enough to stir the hair on your arms, and though nothing has happened yet, you know the calm is over. The ocean has remembered how to breathe, and soon it will teach you what it was holding back. The good news, the tide is going out. The bad news, It isn't supposed to. At first, no one questions it. The sailors have seen tides rise and fall 1,000 times before, the moon pulling the ocean like a puppeteer tugging strings. But this isn't a tide. This is a disappearance. One moment, the water laps at the hull in lazy rhythms. The next, it's slipping away as if some invisible hand has tilted the entire sea and poured it back toward the horizon. The ship lists gently, the ropes groan, and barnacled stones rise from the shallows like corpses pushing through graves. The crew doesn't scream. They cheer. Finally, something to break the dread of silence, something that feels like action. They slap each other on the back, laugh nervously, and declare it a miracle. God has made the sea kneel, one says, pointing to the rapidly retreating waterline. To their untrained eyes, this is fortune. The sea has pulled away, leaving treasures exposed. Shoals littered with stranded fish thrash helplessly in the mud, glinting silver in the light. Shellfish cling to rocks never before touched by air, ripe for the taking. The men don't see doom, they see dinner. From the ship's deck, you watch them scramble into action. Half the crew lowers buckets, the other half clambers down onto the wet sand, slipping and cursing as they race to grab at the wriggling bounty. They whoop and jeer, stomping through mud and slapping fish into sacks. Someone calls it divine providence, a sign their voyage is blessed. The captain, desperate to maintain authority, allows it, even encourages it. Better a crew distracted by harvest than a crew paralyzed by fear. He doesn't understand either. None of them do. You look farther, past the immediate celebration, and notice the horizon. The sea has pulled back so far, it exposes stretches of seabed that no man should ever see. Jagged reefs glisten in the sunlight, slick and sharp, things that have hidden beneath waves for centuries. The exposed bottom stretches endlessly, crawling with stranded crabs, wriggling eels, and creatures better left unseen. The ocean has been scooped away, leaving behind its guts, and men cheer like children at a fairground. They don't realize nature never gives without taking tenfold in return. On shore, villagers have noticed too. Their huts line the beach, their nets hang drying in the sun, and they've lived their whole lives by the rhythm of the sea. Yet even they fail to recognize the danger. They pour onto the sands like ants, laughing, shouting, dragging baskets to scoop up the riches the ocean has abandoned. Barefoot children shriek with delight, chasing stranded fish that flop uselessly. Women with skirts hiked gather clams, stuffing them into aprons. Old men hobble with spears, skewering crabs that scuttle across the glistening expanse. A carnival atmosphere overtakes the coast, as if the sea has decided to host a feast in their honor. They don't see the banquet table is a trap. The air changes again, but more subtly this time. A faint tremor underfoot, a pulse too quiet for men to acknowledge but too deep to ignore. The mud beneath the sailors' boots quivers like jelly, sending ripples across puddles left in hollowed stones. Still, they laugh, too drunk on sudden fortune to care. The sky is painfully blue, the sun merciless and clear, the kind of day that feels eternal in its brightness. Yet beneath the brilliance, something stirs. You can almost feel it beneath your skin, a vibration in your bones, the slow drumbeat of something enormous rising from slumber. A few hesitate. One sailor straightens from his crouch, fish dangling from his hand, and frowns at the horizon. He sees it before the others, a darkness spreading along the line where sky meets water. He tries to speak, but laughter drowns him out. Another points, half in jest, and jokes about Poseidon's chariot rolling in. The others laugh harder, convinced of safety, armored in ignorance. They don't realize the sea has not left them. It is coming back, and it is bringing all its weight. On shore, an old woman pauses mid-gathering, her hands still, her eyes widen, and she mutters something that sounds like a prayer or perhaps a curse. She's seen enough seasons, enough strange turns in nature, to recognize when abundance is poison. She calls to the others, but her voice is swallowed by the frenzy of shouting men and shrieking children. No one listens. They are drunk on plenty, blinded by greed. Fish flip in baskets, water seeps back into shoes, and the first shadow of the returning sea begins to rise like a wall of night far out where the horizon once was. The retreat is complete. The ocean has pulled so far back it looks like the earth itself has tilted. The seabed stretches in grotesque exposure, slick and alien, littered with creatures gasping for breath. And there, at the end of vision, the ocean gathers itself. A bulge, a swelling, a mountain of water clawing upward, growing taller, darker, more impossible with each heartbeat. But the men laugh, the villagers shout, the children splash in puddles, and they believe themselves blessed. They don't understand that the sea never retreats in kindness. It retreats only to return in fury. And when it comes back, it will not be a tide. It will be a wall. The good news: your ship hasn't splintered apart yet. The bad news: no one has the slightest idea why the sea has vanished from beneath you. You want science, but you live in a world where science doesn't exist. What you get instead are mutterings of divine wrath, omens, beasts, and curses. A wall of water is about to obliterate everything, but the conversation around you is whether Poseidon is having a tantrum or whether Satan himself has clawed open the sea floor. That's the level of expertise you're working with. The crew babbles like frightened children, though each insists he alone knows the truth. One points toward the horizon, where the water has withdrawn, squinting against the sunlight, and declares it the sign of a leviathan. No wave could drag back so much ocean, he says, but a monster could. The sea serpent pulls it down, gathering power. He speaks with the certainty of a drunk, and men nod as though convinced. Another sailor counters that it isn't a monster at all, but a miracle. God has blessed them with a banquet, tearing the ocean apart to feed their bellies. He gestures toward the villagers scooping fish off the exposed seabed and calls it proof that heaven rewards the faithful. The man beside him doesn't buy it. He mutters that if God had blessed them, their biscuits wouldn't be moldy and their water wouldn't taste like boiled sweat. The captain pretends to know more than all of them, because that's his job. He paces the deck, barking out half-formed explanations, cobbled from superstition and pride. He claims the moon has shifted its gaze, dragging the tide farther than usual, a rare but natural blessing. He has no idea what he's talking about, but his voice is loud and confident, and for a moment, men feel steadied. They don't notice that he avoids looking at the horizon where a bulge is beginning to form, a shape that no tide, no moon, no blessing could explain away. You know the truth, though you wish you didn't. It isn't a god or a monster, and it isn't the moon, it's the earth itself. Beneath the surface, tectonic plates grind against one another with the patience of centuries, and then, all at once, they snap. An earthquake deep below the seabed displaces billions of tons of water, shoving it aside like a hand plunging into a basin. The ocean reacts the only way it can. It retreats, then builds, then returns, with the force of mountains collapsing. But you are centuries too early for that explanation. The word tectonic doesn't exist. The closest these men come to geology is muttering about demons trapped in the underworld, pounding on the earth's crust. One sailor, shaking, swears he saw fire flare beneath the water just before it began to pull away. He insists it was hell's breath bubbling to the surface, proof that devils are stirring beneath the sea. He grabs at his companions, eyes wide, whispering that they should pray before the gates of hell themselves open and drag the ship down. Another insists he saw a black fin cut the water, massive and glistening, before it disappeared into the froth. The beast circles, he mutters, clutching a charm made of bone around his neck, and when it returns, it will swallow us whole. The villagers on shore are no better. They bicker loudly as they plunder the seabed, each interpretation more absurd than the last. Some claim it's a miracle granted by saints, proof their little chapel and endless prayers have finally been noticed. Others call it a trick of witches, a curse designed to lure them onto the sands so the sea can return and drown them all. Children run barefoot, their laughter shrill and oblivious, while elders trace protective symbols in the air, half believing this will shield them when the waters roar back. You can feel the tension buzzing, a stew of fear, greed, and ignorance bubbling toward hysteria. Astrology offers its nonsense too. A sailor pulls out a worn parchment chart, stars inked in jagged circles, and tries to find an answer. He points at lines scrawled between constellations, muttering that Mars is ascendant in Pisces, and therefore the ocean is in turmoil. He explains it as though it's mathematics, as though a distant red speck in the sky explains why the sea has peeled back to reveal slime-covered rocks and gasping fish. The others lean over his shoulder, nodding, whispering, as though he's cracked a code only sages understand. And then, of course, the priests weigh in. On board, the ship's chaplain clutches his crucifix and declares it judgment. The sins of the crew drunkenness, gambling, whoring have summoned the wrath of heaven. The sea is God's whip, raised high before the lash. He kneels and begins to pray loudly, demanding the rest join him. Some do, dropping to their knees, their mouths spilling half-remembered psalms. Others scoff, spitting on the deck, muttering that a few dirty jokes and dice games won't summon apocalypse. The division grows with every heartbeat. Faith against cynicism, hysteria against bravado. None of them are right. None of them even come close. They are ants arguing whether the magnifying glass above them is the wrath of the sun god or the eye of a dragon. The truth is simple physics, but physics has no place here. So instead, you are left with squabbling, with fear disguised as authority, with comfort found in lies. The ocean has torn itself back to prepare its punishment, and the only explanations on offer are monsters and miracles. Someone points again, this time not at fish or reefs, but at the horizon itself. The line of water is no longer flat. It's rising, bulging, towering higher with every breath. The priests go silent. The astrologer lowers his chart. Even the most stubborn skeptic stops laughing. For a long, terrible moment, the truth is undeniable even without science. Something impossible is coming, but still, the words that pass from cracked lips are not about quakes or plates or displacement. They are about gods, demons, beasts, and curses. They are men trapped in the prison of their ignorance, staring at the wave that will shatter them, and choosing to believe in fairy tales as it rises higher and higher, blotting out the sun. The good news, you can finally hear the sea again. The bad news, it's screaming at you. What began as eerie silence has erupted into a noise that feels less like sound and more like the earth itself groaning through your bones. It's not the steady rhythm of waves you've grown used to, the hiss and crash that lulled you into thinking the sea could be tamed. This is something else, something guttural and ancient, a roar that swallows all conversation and leaves only the pounding of your heart to remind you you're still alive. The crew stops their arguing, the villagers drop their fish, and even the most stubborn drunkard snaps his head to the horizon. No one needs to be told anymore. Something terrible is coming. You notice it first in the animals. Rats that normally skitter in shadows pour from every corner of the ship, darting across the deck in wild, senseless patterns, squealing with a desperation you've never heard before. Horses on shore kick and buck, snapping their reins, eyes rolling white as foam spills around their hooves. Dogs refuse to be coaxed or beaten into stillness, their howls piercing the air louder than any prayer. Even the gulls that never seemed to shut up have vanished, fleeing toward the mountains, their wings black specks against the fading light. Nature has recognized the executioner before the humans have, and it is already running. The horizon is no longer a horizon. It swells like a lung filling with breath, rising higher than seems possible, distorting the line between sky and sea until it looks like the world is folding over itself. At first, it's almost too big to comprehend, a dark line that could be mistaken for storm clouds or a mirage. But then the details sharpen, the white crest beginning to curl at its peak, the sunlight turning the slope of water into a gleaming wall. It's not a trick of the eyes, it's the ocean itself, climbing into the heavens, preparing to come down. Your ears ring with more than the roar of water. You hear wood groaning as the ship shudders under invisible pressure. You hear men muttering prayers they don't remember learning. You hear the faint, sickening sound of the seabed cracking and shifting beneath the retreating tide, stones grating against one another as though the earth is grinding its teeth. Every sound bleeds together into one terrible chorus that doesn't just warn you, it condemns you. Smell betrays you next. The air that once carried salt and tar now reeks of rot and sulfur, as though the sea has dredged up its belly and spilled its guts into the wind. Fish left gasping on the exposed seabed decay before your eyes, their stench mingling with seaweed baking in the sun. The odor is sharp enough to sting your throat, heavy enough to make you gag. It's the smell of death, carried on the breeze as a herald of what's racing toward you. Some men clutch their noses, others retch over the side, but none can escape it. You can't pretend anymore. The ocean wants you, and it smells hungry. Then comes the trembling. The ship rattles as though gripped by invisible hands, the mast vibrating with a low hum that travels down the ropes and into your bones. On shore, villagers stumble as the sand shifts beneath their feet, grains collapsing as if pulled downward by unseen currents. Buckets spill, carts topple, fish slip from grasping fingers. A woman shrieks and points toward the sea, her cry sharp enough to slice through the thunder of water. All heads turn to follow her gaze, and what they see silences even the loudest sailor. The wave has revealed itself in full now. It towers like a mountain made of glass, glistening in the late sun, curving forward as though preparing to slam shut on everything below. The sheer scale of it makes your stomach lurch. You've seen castles, cathedrals, and cliffs, but none of them ever moved. None of them ever came hunting. This is not a backdrop or a landmark. This is an assassin. Every sense conspires against you. Your eyes sting from the salt whipped into the air, tearing without permission. Your skin feels clammy, though the sun is still warm, the wind clawing at you with icy fingers stolen from the depths. Even your tongue rebels, coated with brine as spray drifts across the deck. You can taste the ocean's fury before it even strikes. The men break then. Some collapse to their knees, their heads bowed, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles bleach bone white. Others scramble wildly, grabbing ropes, buckets, anything that might anchor them to something solid when the world comes apart. A few scream, voices thin and useless against the roar of the oncoming wall. None of it matters. There is no plan, no strategy, no salvation. There is only dread, heavy as lead, pressing down until your chest aches with it. And in the middle of it all, time seems to slow. The wave does not crash yet. It hovers, gathering itself like a predator, enjoying the chase before the kill. You can see details that should be impossible from this distance. Whole trees ripped from the seabed swirling inside it. Shards of driftwood tumbling like toys. The broken skeletons of ships already claimed by the quake. The wave carries ghosts in its belly, and soon you will join them. The animals know it. The villagers know it, though they won't admit it. The crew knows it, though they try to mask it with curses and prayers. And you know it most of all. Because dread is not just fear of what's coming, it's recognition. Some part of you has always understood that the sea never wanted you here. You were trespassing, clinging to planks and ropes on a surface that tolerated you only out of indifference. Now that indifference has ended. The moment stretches on, and in that stillness, before the first crash, before the first scream is cut short, You feel it more clearly than ever. The sea is not your path, or your livelihood, or your playground. It is your executioner, and it has finally stood to deliver the sentence. The good news, you finally spotted land. The bad news, it's made entirely of water, and it's coming directly toward you. At first, your mind refuses to believe what your eyes are screaming. The horizon isn't where it's supposed to be. It's rising, swelling upward like a curtain being pulled toward the heavens, and the line between ocean and sky is gone. In its place is a vast wall, impossibly tall, stretching from one end of the world to the other. It isn't a wave in the sense you've ever known a wave. It's the ocean itself, rearing up to smash down everything in its path. The mast of your ship, the tallest thing you've ever trusted to keep you alive out here, looks like a splinter compared to what's bearing down. You can't measure the water in feet or fathoms anymore. It's cathedral-sized, mountain-sized, beyond any human scale. Sunlight glints across its face like 1,000 shattered mirrors, dazzling and blinding as the wall tilts forward, its crown frothing with foam and broken debris. What's left of the sky is shrinking, squeezed into a thin strip above the watery cliff, and then even that begins to vanish. For a moment, the deck goes utterly silent. Every man is frozen in disbelief, mouths open, eyes fixed on the impossible thing growing larger and closer with every heartbeat. Sailors who've spent their lives in storms, merchants who've weathered tempests, mercenaries who've stared down. Swords, all of them stare now with the blank shock of children watching their doom unfold. The ocean was supposed to be dangerous, yes, but not apocalyptic, not alive. Then the silence cracks. Someone mutters a prayer, barely audible, and it sets off a chain reaction. Shouts ripple across the deck, first uncertain, then panicked, until the entire ship is a riot of noise. Men shove each other, rushing for ropes or barrels, as if either could protect them from a wall of water the size of a fortress. Orders are barked, ignored, contradicted. The captain's voice vanishes under the cacophony of terror. What discipline existed a heartbeat ago dissolves into chaos as quickly as salt in water. A few of the crew try to ready the sails, fumbling with ropes that burn their palms, though deep down they know there's nowhere to go. The wave doesn't leave space for escape. It's not something you sail around. Others run below deck, as if hiding in the dark belly of the ship will save them when the world caves in. Some men simply collapse where they stand, clutching crucifixes or amulets, their knuckles white, their lips moving furiously in prayer. One man laughs shy, brittle, unhinged until he chokes on his own spit and falls silent again. The air grows heavier as the wave approaches. You can feel its pull dragging the ship upward even before it touches. Ropes creak, boards groan, barrels slide across the deck. Your stomach lurches, not from motion but from the sense of inevitability. You know you're still floating on the same patch of sea you were before, but your body insists otherwise. It tells you you're already climbing into the jaws of the wave, already caught in the shadow of something that should not exist. The smell thickens too, briny and metallic, carrying the tang of blood and rot. Spray lashes the deck, stinging eyes and skin like needles. The sound is unbearable, a rolling thunder that never stops, the kind that crawls inside your skull and shakes your thoughts apart. You cover your ears, but it doesn't help. The roar isn't just in the air anymore, it's inside you. The sea has taken up residence in your bones, in your chest, in the fragile space where your courage used to be. On shore, the reaction is no less chaotic. Villagers who had moments ago been laughing and collecting stranded fish now scatter in every direction, their baskets abandoned in the sand. Some run uphill, screaming and stumbling, while others stand rooted in awe, their faces pale with wonder. A few drop to their knees, hands raised to the heavens, welcoming what they think is a god come to cleanse them. They are wrong. It is not a god. It is something far less merciful. Back on the ship, you try to steady yourself against the mast, but The wood shakes beneath your grip like a drum skin quivering under a hammer. Splinters drive into your palm and you barely notice. Your eyes are fixed on the wall now, and the wall is closer than ever. Its peak blots out the sun, casting the deck in a cold gray shadow. What remains of the horizon is gone. There is only water. Every man now knows the truth, though none will say it aloud. You are not preparing to fight. You are not preparing to flee. You are preparing to die. The ship is no more than a coffin with sails. The crew nothing more than insects clinging to its lid. And still the wave comes on, steady, unrelenting, as though the sky itself has chosen to meet the sea and crush everything caught in between. For a breathless instant, as you crane your neck to take in its impossible height, it seems the wave isn't moving at all, just towering there like a wall separating this world from whatever comes next. But then the crest curls further forward, foam spilling in sheets, and you realize the truth. It is already falling. The instant the wall of water tilts forward, every last thread of order rips apart. Screams split the air so loudly they drown even the roar of the sea, a chorus of terror that rises from the deck like smoke from a pyre. Men run in every direction at once, colliding, shoving, clawing, desperate to move somewhere, anywhere, that isn't directly under the falling sky of water. A sailor stumbles over a coil of rope and is trampled before he can rise, boots slamming into his ribs until he goes silent. The captain bellows commands, but his words dissolve into panic before they reach the men they're meant for. Some hear only fragments, sails, hold fast, pray, and act on whichever piece lodges in their frantic minds. A group rushes to the rigging, tugging at ropes with bleeding hands, though they don't know why. Others hurl themselves toward the ship's single boat, half rotted and barely big enough for five, their eyes wild with a feral gleam. Knives flash as they fight for it, teeth bared, curses spat. They slash at each other's arms, at each other's throats, and in the frenzy, none notice the lifeboat isn't even seaworthy. Above them, the mast groans as if it knows its own death is coming. Rigging snaps like bones breaking, lines whipping across the deck with lethal force. One lashes a man across the face, tearing skin and blinding him instantly. He stumbles backward, shrieking, his blood mingling with seawater sloshing across the planks. No one helps him. There's no time, no mercy, left aboard. The smell of sweat and fear overpowers even the salt spray. Men clutch each other in desperation, not out of brotherhood, but out of instinct, dragging companions down in their scramble for survival. The deck tilts underfoot as the ship lurches toward the rising water, throwing bodies against railings and masts. Someone vomits, and the stench joins the miasma of rot, blood, and brine. The sound of prayers is everywhere, now half-remembered Latin, muttered through cracked lips, pagan charms whispered into the wind, cries for mothers who will never answer. None of them are loud enough to reach the gods they're begging. Then comes the first slap of the wave's hand. Not the full force, not yet, but a surge that crashes over the bow and smashes into the deck with the weight of stone. Men vanish under the torrent, swept like rag dolls into the churning sea. Barrels tear free from their lashings and roll across the deck like murderous wheels, crushing legs, cracking ribs. One sailor clings to a railing until the wood splinters under the strain, flinging him into the maelstrom. His scream cuts off the instant he hits the water. Panic twists into violence. In the frenzy of doom, fear turns every man into an enemy. Fists fly, knives stab, bodies wrestle for scraps of imagined safety. A merchant smashes another over the head with an iron belaying pin, his face twisted with survival's madness, only to be swept overboard himself by the next spray of foam. A pair of brothers who swore to guard each other die locked in a grapple, their last breaths wasted on strangling one another as the sea swallows them both. The mast leans, then shatters with a crack like thunder. The canvas whips free, a useless white shroud flailing in the wind. Splinters rain down, stabbing into flesh, blinding eyes, tearing through ragged clothing. The ship, already more coffin than vessel, is now a carcass being picked apart by the elements. And still the wave hasn't even struck in full. What's hit so far is only the herald, the foaming outrider of the true monster looming above. You glance up, and your gut twists at the sight. The main body of the wave hangs overhead, a mountain of water curving forward, darker than storm clouds, heavy as the sky itself. Every scream, every struggle, every desperate act of survival suddenly seems absurd in its shadow. Men sense it too. The fighting falters into despair. Some throw themselves flat on the deck, as if lying down might spare them, as if the wave might politely pass overhead. Others stand with arms outstretched, welcoming the end, as though they've been chosen for sacrifice. A handful dive willingly into the sea, deciding drowning on their own terms is better than waiting for the inevitable crush. The air grows thin in your lungs, suffocating, though the sea's spray lashes your face. You feel the deck quake beneath your feet, boards screaming, as if the ship itself is begging for release from this punishment. And then it comes the moment when the horizon collapses and the sky itself falls. The wave slams down, not like water, but like stone. It doesn't splash, it obliterates. The deck disappears under a world of liquid weight. The mast's stump is driven straight through the hull, splitting it like a carcass. The air fills with the shriek of timber giving way, of iron nails tearing loose, of men crushed instantly into silence. Your mouth opens, but you don't scream. The ocean rushes in too fast, filling throat and lungs before sound can escape. Chaos becomes meaningless. There is no deck, no crew, no ship. There is only water in every direction, above, below, within. A body bumps against yours, limp, eyes open but empty. A hand claws your shoulder, not in malice but in blind instinct, dragging you both deeper. You kick free, but the motion is sluggish, feeble against the tide that owns you now. The wave doesn't just strike, it consumes. And as it swallows ship and men alike, you understand the truth that no prayer or knife or scrap of wood can change. The sea has claimed you. It begins as a shadow, an unnatural darkness creeping across the sea. At first, it could almost be mistaken for a storm cloud lowering itself toward the horizon, except it isn't above you. It's behind you, rising from the ocean itself. The men on deck squint and shade their eyes, muttering half-formed questions until silence grips them one by one. What they are staring at isn't a cloud or a storm or a distant island. It is water, all of it, climbing higher than reason allows, a wall that blots out the line where the sky should be. The sound comes next, and it's not the crash of a normal wave. It's deeper, older, a sound that lives in the earth's bones. Thunder without lightning, a grinding roar like stone cliffs breaking apart, layered with the low groan of the sea's very weight being lifted against itself. Every plank in the ship begins to tremble, not from the wind, but from that vibration rolling across the water. You feel it in your chest as much as you hear it, each beat of the wave's monstrous heart sinking with your own, until panic replaces rhythm. The wave continues to rise, lifting itself into a crest that defies all proportion, taller than the masts, taller than any tower these men have ever seen, taller even than the cathedrals whose bells once called them home. Its top begins to curl, as though the ocean itself is leaning forward to take a look at you before it swallows you whole. The sun disappears behind it, and in its absence the world dims, as if dusk has fallen in a single breath. Shadows stretch across the deck, wrapping every man in a premature night. The sailors stumble from one side of the ship to the other, unable to decide if they should brace, pray, or run. Their voices are a scatter of sound, useless noise against the growl of the sea. Someone insists it isn't real, that eyes are playing tricks, that no water could climb so high. Another points to the toppling birds, gulls and crows and hawks flapping madly away from the wall as though they've seen it before. Their wings beat desperately, but even their cries are lost in the endless growl of the oncoming monster. The ship tilts on the restless swells, groaning as if it knows what's coming. Water sloshes across the deck, and in that thin layer of foam the reflections of men tremble like ghosts already claimed. You can smell the salt more sharply now, mixed with something darker, like wet stone being crushed into dust. The air grows damp and heavy, thick enough to choke on. With every breath, it feels as if the ocean is already inside your lungs, rehearsing for what's about to come. No one speaks clearly anymore. Voices break into sobs or prayers, curses or nonsense. A boy no older than 16 clutches a wooden cross to his chest, so tightly the splinters dig into his skin, whispering pleas to a god that has chosen silence. Beside him, an older sailor shakes his fist at the wave, roaring back at it as if defiance could hold it back. His voice is nothing but a scratch against the roar, a brave but pitiful protest against the end of everything. And then the crest finally begins to lean forward, its shadow darkening the sea to black. For an instant, there is an illusion of stillness, as if the world has paused to give you one last moment to understand. The horizon is gone, replaced entirely by water bending toward you. It isn't just Largit is all-consuming, a moving cliff made of liquid stone, with ridges and folds shaped by impossible pressure. The edges curl like fingers reaching down to pluck you away from life. The sound swells until it isn't sound anymore, but sensation, rattling through your ribs, drilling into your teeth, shaking the marrow in your bones. It is the sound of the world tearing itself apart, the voice of the deep come up to speak only once. Every creak of the ship, every prayer, every scream is drowned beneath it. The noise is so vast that it feels like silence because nothing else will ever be heard again. Time stretches thin. The wave does not simply approach. It towers. It looms. It becomes the only thing in existence. Faces turn upward, eyes wide with the same uncomprehending horror, every expression frozen between disbelief and surrender. Men who fought for scraps of food, who stabbed for places on a rotten boat, now stand shoulder to shoulder, united only in the knowledge that nothing human survives what is about to happen. The sky and sea are no longer separate. They meet in a single fluid wall that bends toward you, blotting out air, sun, and hope. The ship shudders once, as though sighing its last breath, and the wall begins its fall. The final sound is not thunder, not waves, not screaming. It is everything at once, folding in on itself, deafening and final. And then, the sea comes down. The first touch is not gentle. The ship doesn't glide up the face of the wave like a gull on a breeze. It is seized, hoisted, and hurled skyward, as if a giant hand has snatched it from the water to see how it breaks. Your knees vanish under you. The deck drops away, then slams back, then leaps again, and your stomach lurches into your throat as the bow claws upward at an angle that turns the world into a slanted painting. Men grab for anything rope, rail, each other and still slide toward the stern in a scrabbling avalanche of boots and splinters. The air crushes flat in your lungs, then rushes out with a bark you don't recognize as your own voice. The sound is not a single noise, but a collision of them. A grinding bellow as oak ribs wrench against iron nails, a sharp rifle crack of timbers giving way, the high, wild keening of rigging strung to the breaking point, and beneath it all, the continuous, monstrous growl of the wave itself. The ship complains like a living thing having its back broken. Planks flex under your hands, warm with the heat of friction as wood fibers tear apart. Nails scream out of their beds and skitter across the deck like thrown stars. You feel the vibration through your bones, a tuning fork struck by the fist of the sea. The first men go not with dignity, but with surprise. One instant they're braced, white-huckled, faces upturned. The next they're airborne, limbs pinwheeling, mouths O-shaped in silent curses swallowed by wind. A barrel breaks loose and scythes through a knot of sailors, scattering them like bowling pins before bounding into the green air and vanishing. A mercenary tries to anchor himself with a coil of rope looped around his wrist. The rope goes taut and yanks him clean over the rail so fast it looks like a magic trick with a missing punchline. The boy with the wooden cross flies past you, eyes huge, fingers still clamped around his relic as he sails into a white explosion of spray. You don't fly. Not yet. You hit the mast first, ribs ringing, and end up flattened against it like a nailed tapestry as the ship rears higher. Your fingers find a seam in the tarred wood and cling as if you could scratch grooves deep enough to matter. The wave lifts you all higher, higher, the deck pitching until the horizon tilts past your shoulder and the sky becomes a narrow, bruised strip above a wall of green glass. In that brief suspension, before gravity remembers you, everything is too clear. You can see the shore, tiny and wrong, the scrambling dots of villagers frozen mid-run, the exposed seabed gleaming like the inside of a cut. Then the bow knifes into the lip of the wave, and the mast shudders through your chest. The yard snaps with a pistol crack, and the sail rips open from foot to head like a throat, fabric flailing into useless penance. The torn canvas slaps faces and blinds eyes, tangling legs as men trip and tumble toward the rail. A belaying pin tears free, spins end over end, and breaks a man's jaw with a sound like a dropped plate. The lifeboat rotted, decorative, the altar of all false hopes wrenches from its davits, flips, and is skimmed away on the sheet of water that now races across the deck as if the ship has become a tilted sluice. Everything not nailed down moves, and the sea is ripping out the nails. The first real water lands then, not spray but weight, a slab that hits the bow and avalanches aft. You go under without leaving the ship. The world turns to a cold green roar. Your grip tears free, and you're a leaf in a mill race, cartwheeling past knees, barrels, rope ends, a spinning oar that clips your shoulder and sets your arm on fire. You smash into the rail and bounce, swallow a mouthful of ocean that tastes of iron and rot, and surface into a storm of shouts you can't understand. A hand claws your hair. You twist away on instinct, lungs already burning as the next sheet of water sprints down the deck toward you like a herd of clear horses. Below, the hold erupts, hatches that were dogged tight flecks and spit geysers. Then the dogs shear, and the lids go up like tossed lids of soup pots. Barrels burst their hoops and become blunt battering rams, slewing through darkness and meat. Men who fled below for safety meet the sea in a narrow corridor with no air and no light. Their last sound is a muffled thud against cargo that was not meant to move. Salted fish and human bodies churn together in blind fists of current, while the ship's ribs groan and crack, 1, 2, 3, like knuckles popping in God's fist. The captain is still on his feet, astonishingly bellowing something no one can hear. His hat is gone. His face is red with the effort of command, his mouth stretched around the syllables of an order that has no category. He points to the rigging as if a line drawn here, hauled there, could persuade the mountain to be merciful. A spar drops from above like a guillotine and misses him by a breath. The next one does not. He is here, then not. A smear of color under white water. Another lurch. You feel the ship reach the top of the lift light for a heartbeat, stupidly light, as if the world has let go of your belt and you are weightless. Men gasp in a unanimous animal sound. The horizon drops away beneath you, the trough yawning like a canyon, and the ship hangs, hanging too long, a pause longer than breath. In that impossible stillness, you see details the living should not witness. The face of a rat glued to the deck by suction, eyes bulging, a rosary snagged on a splinter, beads ticking, a mercenary's sword slowly floating point up, glittering like a needle waiting for thread. Then the bow tips over the far side, and the whole world falls. The descent is worse than the rise. The ship doesn't slide, it plummets, and the air claws at your face, as if it, too, wants to hold you back from what's below. Men who'd managed to keep their feet are catapulted like stones. Two hit the mast and bounce in opposite directions, their bones making the dull wooden sounds of mallets on sodden logs. Someone finally screams a name, but the name is washed away as quickly as its owner. The rail meets your shins with a crack that blooms white behind your eyes, and again, you're underwater, farther, deeper. The temperature dropping into a cold that feels like teeth. You somersault through a forest of shattered planks and whipping lines. The wave is not water now. It is muscle. It is will. It is a moving wall that presses your chest until your heart throws its fists against your ribs. Sound compresses into a bass note that blurs your vision. Pressure climbs inside your skull like a rising tide. You spit, choke, flail, touch something solid that rolls away a barrel. A man, you can't tell, then collide with the anchor cable and wrap an arm around it out of reflex. It tries to tear your shoulder out by the root. You hang there, a heartbeat, a bug on a whisker, while the green overhead boils with bubbles and wreckage. When you break the surface, the ship is no longer where you left it. It is skewed, twisted, a jaw with half its teeth knocked out. The foredeck is lower, the stern higher, and between them a jagged seam has opened where daylight shines through places it should not. Water pours in like an army. A spar rides past with a man still tied to it by his waist. His head lolls, knocking the wood softly each time the spar tips. The boy with the cross bobs up and vanishes again, the little wooden Christ still clenched between knuckles already turning blue. Another slap of water, and more men are gone. They go in every direction the sea wants them to. Straight up, straight down, sideways off the edge. One leaps for a trailing rope and catches it. The rope comes free like a joke and hisses away through his hands, skin peeling in pale curls. A barrel pins a leg against the capstan and the leg folds, the sound more wood than flesh. The prayers that continue are whispered now, not to God, but to anyone listening, to the air itself, to the boards, to the sea that does not bargain. The ship keeps cracking. Each noise is a verdict. The keel twists, and you feel it through the soles of your feet, a long, slow groan that says a spine has decided to be two spines. The ribs follow, popping in sequence. The deck seams, once tight with tar, yawn like mouths. You realize the structure below you isn't a ship anymore. It's debris that hasn't admitted it yet. You hang on because there is nothing else to do. Your fingernails pack with tar and salt. Your lungs burn like opened furnaces. Around you, the men who remain are reduced to basics. Clutch, gasp, stare. The first impact has taken all the arguments, all the hierarchies, all the boasts, and ground them down into a single silent question that no one can answer. How long until the second? The sea does not answer. It only lifts again. It happens faster than thought, yet drawn out with the cruelty of a slow-motion nightmare. The ship is not simply pushed to its side, it is rolled, wrenched, and upended, as if a child has grown bored of a toy and decided to see how it breaks when hurled against the floor. The deck becomes a wall, the mast a ladder tilted into emptiness, and every man aboard is converted into cargo tossed loose from the hold. You are not falling so much as tumbling within a world that has discarded all rules of up and down. The very concept of balance, of standing, of clinging to something steady, is mocked by the sea's casual grip as it turns the vessel on its head. The sound of the capsize is different from the wave's roar. It is a chorus of violence, each element joining at once. The ripping shriek of oak beams splitting grain by grain, the sharp retort of spars snapping in halves, the whip of sails tearing into useless rags, and beneath it, the low rumble of shifting weight as barrels, crates, and iron fittings surge in one unstoppable direction. The hull was built to resist the sea's pressure from below, not the wrenching twist of inversion, and so the ship itself comes apart like a poorly sewn garment pulled at every seam. The mast goes first. It does not bend gracefully. It breaks like dry kindling, one after another, the tallest splintering mid-shaft with a gunshot crack that echoes inside your chest. The rigging snaps back in whiplash arcs, ropes hissing like snakes as they lash across the chaos. A sailor is bisected by one before he even sees it coming, his scream cut short by the recoil that flings what is left of him into the maelstrom. The crow's nest, once a lookout, now plummets like a falling bell tower, taking with it anyone who thought it a refuge. When it hits the deck, it smashes through as if the boards were wet parchment, vanishing below into the flooding dark. Everything stored below is now free, and the sea makes weapons of it all. Barrels filled with salted meat and beer careen across the collapsing planks, their iron hoops turned into bludgeons. A cask bursts and explodes into a swarm of jagged staves, each one spinning fast enough to open flesh with the precision of a blade. Crates burst open as they tumble, their contents stools, nails, spare rope, even livestock joining the murderous carousel. A goat, braying in terror, collides with a man's chest hard enough to crack ribs. The animal flails with hooves sharpened by panic, and both vanish into the flood that now pours from one end of the ship to the other. The anchor chain unspools from its nest with a metallic scream, links the size of fists whirling in mad loops. One sailor tries to dodge, but the chain wraps around his torso and pulls him across the tilting deck like a hooked fish. He has time for one shriek before his body is yanked through the scupper and out into the open sea, snapped away like kindling in a gale. Nails, hundreds of them shaken loose, scatter through the water, glinting like a hailstorm of needles. You feel some strike your skin, shallow cuts that sting, but could just as easily have been deeper, fatal punctures if the angle had shifted a hair's breadth. The ship rolls fully now, no longer recognizable as a vessel but a carcass turning belly up in the tide. The deck becomes the ceiling, then the floor again, until orientation itself is meaningless. Men flail not to fight the sea but to distinguish which way air might still be found. The rolling traps many under collapsed beams, their legs pinned by the dead weight of splintered timbers. The stronger ones try to lift, straining with groans, but the sea rushes in too quickly. Their mouths fill, their cries bubble, and their eyes show the moment realization eclipses hope. You are thrown into the chaos without choice. One instant your hands clutch at the broken rail, the next you are underwater, hammered against the ceiling of the inverted hull. Splinters prick your face like teeth. A jagged plank rakes across your back, tearing cloth and flesh alike. You push off, flailing into the thick soup of debris that swirls around you. In the murk, a body collides with you, limp and unresisting, the whites of its eyes wide and milked over. You shove it away, only for a barrel to strike your hip and spin you end over end. Every sense is overwhelmed. The water is not just cold but alive, surging with pieces of your former refuge. The taste of salt and rot coats your tongue. Your ears ring with a deafening underwater chorus of cracks, thuds, and screams muffled into inhuman wails. Sight is a fractured blur of green light, bubbles, and the occasional too clear glimpse of something you wish you hadn't seen, a severed arm turning lazily in the current. A face pressed against the underside of the hull, as if in silent prayer, a child's toy doll floating upward through the wreckage like a soul departing. The air pocket you surface into is a coffin of noise. Dozens are packed here, clutching at the slick beams, gasping in the darkness while the sea gnaws at the edges. Men sob and choke, their voices frantic in prayer, curses, or outright madness. The wood groans as though deciding whether to crush or release you. Somewhere, the ship's bell tolls underwater, struck again and again by shifting debris, its hollow clang marking each second like a dirge. Then the next surge of water bursts through the seams, and the air pocket shrinks to nothing. The ship does not simply sink. It is dragged down, pulled apart, shredded by the very sea that bore it. The capsized hull folds inward as it goes, splintering into jagged ribs that poke from the frothing surface before vanishing altogether. The last mast tips skyward like a drowning hand, then snaps with a final shriek and disappears beneath the foam. All that remains is wreckage and the survivors scattered among it, their heads bobbing like dark corks, their cries already fewer as exhaustion and panic pull them under. You cling to what floats a jagged beam, a piece of the deck still broad enough to bear your weight. Your knuckles burn against the rough wood, your breath tears in ragged heaves, and around you the ocean is littered with the remains of everything that had once seemed solid and dependable. The capsized vessel has become shrapnel in a watery battlefield, every shard eager to wound. Men who survive the first roll bleed out from gashes made by their own ship. Those too weak to hold on are bludgeoned by the remains of cargo once meant to feed them. The sea claims its harvest, and the harvest is rich. Above, the sky is gray and pitiless. Below, the water still heaves with the echo of the waves passing. You realize with a shuddering clarity that the ship was never the true enemy. It was only wood and rope, fragile bones bound together by human hope. The real enemy was always the sea, and in the moment it chose to strike, every tool, every plank, every scrap of cargo you trusted became a weapon turned against you. And the sea is not finished yet. It is not a fall. It is a swallowing. One moment there is air thin, frantic, poisoned with scream sand. The next it has been stripped away, replaced by a crushing, icy mouth that clamps down on your entire body. The plunge is instant, merciless, and absolute. Your ears pop as the water presses inward. Your stomach lurches as the world spins, and there is no up, no down, only the blind drag of an element that does not care whether you rise or sink. It is not a place, it is a prison, and the door has slammed shut. Salt burns your eyes, a raw sting that forces them closed. You open your mouth by instinct and immediately regret it. The ocean rushes in like a thief, choking and expanding in your chest, filling every inch where breath had once been. You gag, cough, convulse, but none of it matters. The sea has entered you, and it does not leave willingly. Your throat is on fire, your chest a furnace of pressure and panic, and still you kick, thrash, claw for some direction. There is no air here, only the desperate animal need for it, and the longer you stay under, the more your body betrays you. The cold is a weapon. It slices through your clothes, burrows beneath your skin, clamps its fangs into your bones. Muscles seize, fingers stiffen, joints ache as though hammered by frost. Every stroke is sluggish, each movement like dragging chains. The warmth of life feels like it is being siphoned away, drawn out into the endless cold around you. You cannot outswim it. You can only delay the inevitable moment, when the chill turns to numbness, and numbness turns to nothing at all. You flail through darkness thicker than any night you have known. The wave has churned the sea into a black stew of foam, timber, and flesh. Pieces of the ship roll beside you, sharp edges catching your arms and legs, splinters lodging in your skin. Something strikes your back hard enough to knock the last thread of air from your lungs. You spin blindly, swallowing more salt, and realize with horror that you are no longer swimming, you are being tumbled. The ocean has made you into driftwood, spun helplessly in a current that doesn't care whether you live or die. Bodies float nearby, though float is the wrong word. They drift like discarded rags, limbs bent at wrong angles, hair streaming in tendrils. Some eyes are open, too wide, too pale, and they watch you even as their owners no longer breathe. One man collides with you, his lips blue, his hands clawing at your shoulders as though you might be his ladder to the surface. You fight him off, horrified at your own brutality, but survival has no patience for mercy. He slips away, still reaching, swallowed by the dark that presses from every direction. Your body begins to betray you in small ways. The burn in your lungs intensifies, a searing ache that demands relief. Your legs cramp from cold and exertion. Each second feels like a minute, each attempt to push upward like climbing through lead. Your vision pulses with bursts of white light, fireworks born of oxygen-starved blood. Somewhere in the churning void above, there must be air, but the sea twists and rolls you so that each stroke might just as easily take you deeper. You are not swimming in, or you are clawing, writhing, begging for the surface with a body too weak to find it. The noises are strangest of all. Underwater, the roar of the wave is muted but constant, a drumbeat that pounds against your skull. Mixed into it are other sounds. The groan of shattered beams sinking beside you, the metallic clatter of chain and nails, the muffled thud of cargo colliding. And faintest of all, the terrible chorus of the dying screams cut off mid-note, shouts bubbling into gurgles, prayers ending in silence. They surround you in every direction, an orchestra of fear and finality carried on the current. Then, against all odds, your head breaks the surface. You gasp, cough, spit seawater, every breath as jagged as broken glass. The night air feels too thin to be real, stolen in gasps between waves that still slap against your face. You barely have time to breathe before another surge throws you under again. The ocean does not give, it loans. You are allowed air only long enough to remember what you are missing before it steals it back. Each second on the surface is too short, each plunge beneath too long, and the cycle grinds on with merciless rhythm. You clutch at anything that floats abeam, a broken plank, the shattered ribs of the ship, but the debris is as much danger as refuge. A jagged edge slices your palm, a loose barrel slams into your ribs hard enough to bruise. Still, you cling. Instinct demands it. Your fingers lock around splintered wood, though they bleed for it, though the cold numbs them to useless claws. You cannot let go, because to let go is to drift downward, into the place where screams no longer rise. The water never stops moving. It pulls you one way, then another, currents curling like the fingers of a hand determined to keep you. Foam blinds you, spray chokes you, each swell higher than the last. You cough until blood mixes with salt, the taste coppery and vile. Every breath is a gamble, every gasp taken while praying the next wave will not close over your head for good. Above, the stars are smudged behind mist, distant and unreachable, as if mocking the small flicker of life still burning in you. Your mind narrows to two commands: breathe and hold. Breathe when you can, hold when you cannot. Nothing else exists. Not the ship, not the men, not the past you left on shore or the future you will never see. Just the animal rhythm of survival in the jaws of the sea. Even thoughts of hope seem laughable now. Hope requires the assumption that the world cares, and it has made abundantly clear that it does not. The longer you fight, the more your body fails. Muscles falter, lungs weaken, eyelids droop heavy with exhaustion. You lose count of how many times you've gone under. The difference between air and water blurs as salt coats your mouth, fills your nostrils, pours down your throat. The ocean has already claimed pieces of you: warmth, strength, blood. It wants the rest. It is patient. It knows you cannot outlast it. When you finally slip beneath again, the darkness feels thicker than before. The cold is no longer sharp but numb, almost gentle. Your chest does not burn as much, it simply grows heavy, like a weight pressing from within. The bubbles escaping your mouth are fewer now, drifting upward like beads of silver. You watch them rise with distant fascination, knowing you should follow, but your body no longer responds. You are drifting downward, and this time the current does not resist. It welcomes you. The ocean eats you not with teeth, but with inevitability. It pulls you into its gut, where the wreckage, the bodies, the prayers, and the screams all dissolve into silence. It does not rage. It does not boast. It simply consumes. And in the end, there is no struggle left. Only the dark, the cold, and the certainty that the sea has won. The ocean is no respecter of rank. Captain, cook, mercenary, Rat the sea does not care which one you were when you still stood on planks above it. The wave has done its work, and now the real butcher's tally begins, the quiet arithmetic of drowning. Within minutes, the water is heavy with bodies. The strong thrash for a time, their arms beating uselessly against a force older and hungrier than muscle. The weak simply vanish, tugged below without ceremony. And those who thought themselves clever, who clung to barrels or planks or the wreck of a mast, soon learn that wood offers little comfort when the sea has claimed the rest. There are no life jackets. The very idea of one would sound laughable to men who consider fleas a permanent accessory. You are either buoyant through accident because a cask of spoiled beer floats, or because a coil of rope happens to tangle about your armor you are already sinking. Rescue boats? As much a fantasy as angels plucking you from the water. The longboat, if there was one, shattered like a chicken bone when the wave struck. Now, the only craft left is the main hull, and it too is upside down and taking on water, its ribs jutting from the waves like the carcass of something already dead. The notion of being saved is as far from these men as the stars glittering far above the chaos. Salt water is not drunk, it is inhaled. That is the distinction that matters in the end. Men cough, gag, vomit, but it changes nothing. The sea finds the lungs eventually. Some swallow it in despair, some in panic, some while clawing at the backs of their shipmates to stay aloft one moment longer. No one lasts. The clever, the pious, the crew leech in turn gulps down the same burning brine. Each body jerks and shudders, then stills, and each body begins to float, swollen and silent, face up if fortunate, face down if not. Rats, though, are another story. They cling with a tenacity that borders on mocking. You see them scrambling up the sides of barrels, perching on beams, whiskers twitching as though this were nothing but a new inconvenience in a long life of inconveniences. They will outlast most of the sailors. A dozen men might die in the time it takes one rat to groom the salt from its fur. This is the hierarchy of survival at sea. Vermin endure, while men with swords and titles and prayers go limp in minutes. The prayers themselves turn grotesque. Latin half-remembered between coughs, oaths shouted at heaven with frothing mouths, bargains made in whispers that never reach a listener. One man promises to build a church if spared. Another swears he will give up women and drink. Another simply curses, strings of obscenities flung upward in defiance. None of it matters. The water closes each mouth alike, rendering the sacred and profane equally mute. The only altar left is the ocean floor, and every worshipper will kneel there in time. The cold works quickly. Blood flees the limbs, retreating to preserve the heart, but the body is not fooled. Fingers stiffen, legs cramp, movements slow, until a man no longer thrashes but merely drifts. They look almost peaceful at that point, arms floating out as if in some parody of prayer. But the calm is not mercy. It is simply the last stage before the lungs flood and the heart yields. The sea has no interest in drama. It wants stillness, and it always gets it. Above, the wreckage becomes a grave marker. Shards of mast bob beside kegs and coils of rope. A cask of spoiled beer bursts open, sending its sour contents into the waves. A pointless offering to gods that do not exist. A chest of cargo, carefully sealed and guarded for weeks, pops open in the surf, spilling bolts of wool that soak, sag, and sink. Men who might once have killed to protect those goods now float lifeless beside them, reduced to equal weight in the ledger. The ocean tallies everything the same way. Dead wood, dead men, all debris. A few cling longer than the rest. They manage to keep their faces above the spray, gasping, spitting, flailing toward the phantom idea of a shore they cannot see. Their eyes are wild, bloodshot, skin pale with cold and shock. They cling to hope with the same desperation that keeps their fingers clamped around shattered planks. But hope is just another kind of drowning, slower and meaner than the sea itself. It dangles before them, makes them think survival possible, until exhaustion closes the hand and the board slips away. Then the water accepts them, just as it accepted the others. Time grows meaningless in the wreckage. Minutes blur into hours, though no one lasts that long. The sound of struggle fades, replaced by the rhythmic slap of waves against floating corpses. The night is starry, cruelly serene, as though the heavens see nothing amiss in the massacre below. Somewhere in the darkness, fish are already investigating, drawn by the blood and bile released into the water. The sea is efficient. Nothing goes unused. There is a particular silence that comes when the last shouts vanish, a stillness broken only by the crash of waves against flotsam. It is not the silence of peace, but of consumption. The sea has eaten its fill. It does not boast or gloat, it simply absorbs. The men who once crowded the deck, shouted orders, cracked jokes, cursed the winds, where are they now? Dissolved into the swell, indistinguishable from the foam. Their legacy is the occasional bob of a hand above the waves, before it too sinks from sight. The truth is ugly, but undeniable. Medieval sailors did not survive tsunamis. They barely survived their own voyages in calm weather. A single rogue wave, let alone a wall of water that dwarfed the masts, was not a challenge but an execution. The sea was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and its sentences were always carried out in full. So the ocean takes everyone, not because they were wicked or foolish or unprepared, not because they deserved it, but because that is what the ocean does. It takes. It has always taken, and it never gives back. The ocean has no patience for flailing. It has no sympathy for the desperate way a man kicks his legs or thrashes his arms, because the sea knows the truth. Most of these men were never taught how to swim. The very concept of swimming as a skill, something a person might practice for pleasure or safety, was alien to the medieval mind. Water was not a playground, it was a tomb, and everyone knew it. If you fell in, you did not climb back out. The sea was final. From childhood they were taught to fear it. A river might ferry disease. A pond might hide demons. The ocean itself was an infinite void where souls went to disappear. You did not enter water by choice. Bathing was rare and shallow, more ritual than cleansing, and always with solid ground beneath your feet. Wading, yes. Splashing perhaps, but swimming? The act of surrendering your body to water and trusting that it would hold you? Madness. Suicide. No peasant would teach it to their children. No noble would waste their time with it. And no sailor would expect it to save them once the ship went down. Sailors, ironically, were the least likely of all to swim. They knew the water best, which meant they feared it most. To them, the ocean was a living god, one that took and took without remorse. They lived on its surface the way a prisoner paces the walls of a cell. They survived only by keeping their distance from its true depths. To cast yourself into the water willingly, even in practice, was to flirt with death. So they stayed on deck, clinging to wood and prayer, and the thin illusion of safety that came with sails. When the wave has smashed the vessel, and the bodies are tumbling into the foam, this superstition reveals itself in full. Men hit the surface like stones, their arms flapping wildly, not in strokes but in blind panic. They choke at once, spitting salt, their mouths gulping at air that never seems to come. Some try to dog paddle in crude motions, lifting their heads desperately above the spray. Others immediately sink, their boots and woolen clothes dragging them downward before they have time to scream. Even those who manage to stay up for a minute or two soon cramp and tire, their frantic flails slowing until the water closes over their faces. There is no technique here, no grace, no chance of endurance. The few who might have seen Roman frescoes of swimmers or monks scribbling diagrams of water play never thought such things applied to them. Those were myths, fancies, irrelevant to a world where drowning was as common as plague. In the collective mind of the age, water meant death. The church reinforced it with stories of floods and monstrous leviathans lurking in the abyss. Local legends whispered of drowned men who returned as restless spirits. Why learn to swim when the water was cursed? Better to stay dry and alive. And so, in this moment, surrounded by black waves and broken timber, the curse becomes prophecy. A handful attempt to kick toward floating wreckage, but they tire in seconds, their heavy woolen tunics sodden and dragging. The boots alone, thick leather saturated with seawater, act as anchors pulling them relentlessly down. Even if by some miracle a man manages to shrug off his clothes, the cold paralyzes him before he can move more than a few strokes. The body seizes, the lungs gasp reflexively, and the ocean takes him anyway. What's almost comical, if you can laugh at tragedy, is that the ones who do not struggle sometimes last longer. A man too stunned to fight, who lies belly up by accident, might float for a little while. The fat merchant, with his heavy jowls and distended belly, mocked for gluttony on deck, now bobs like a buoy, while the lean, muscular soldier sinks in seconds. Strength and training mean nothing here. It is luck, pure and cruel, that determines whether you vanish immediately or get a few more minutes of false hope. The fear of water itself hastens their end. They flinch with every wave, panic at every splash, eyes wide with the certainty that they are moments away from being dragged down by some unseen monster. In truth, no creature has to help them drown. They do it themselves, exhausting their bodies with terror, wasting what little air they have in screams that vanish under the crash of surf. Each inhalation brings salt water, each cough brings more panic, and soon their fate is sealed. On shore, villagers who rushed out to collect stranded fish as the tide retreated will fare no better when the sea comes back for them. They too cannot swim, and their joy at scooping up flopping silver prizes turns to confusion when the wall of water arrives. They are slammed down, pinned against stones, dragged into currents they do not understand. Flailing, they reach for baskets, for nets, for anything that might float, but their ignorance is total. A modern child with a week of lessons in a shallow pool would last longer than any of them. The cruel irony is that swimming was not an impossible art in their time. The knowledge existed, passed down from antiquity, written about by monks who preserved Roman texts describing breaststrokes and floating. Some cultures farther east and south retained the skill, but here, in this medieval European sea, it had been forgotten, shunned, and abandoned to myth. To practice it was to risk suspicion, to seem unnatural, to toy with forces one was not meant to. And now, when it might have mattered, no one can do more than flail. In the end, the ocean claims them quickly, not because they are weak, but because they are helpless in the most literal sense. They have never known what it means to trust their bodies in water, never believed it was possible to move with purpose instead of panic. They thrash, they sink, they vanish, all in accordance with the superstition they carried since childhood. The sea confirms their fears perfectly. It does not forgive their ignorance. It does not reward their courage. It only swallows them whole, as it always has. The water does not wait for you to adjust. The instant you hit the surface, the sea reaches for every stitch of fabric, every seam of leather, every strip of iron strapped to your body, and transforms them from clothing and equipment into anchors. Wool, thick and scratchy, soaks through in seconds and clings to your skin like the embrace of a corpse. Each fiber drinks greedily, swelling with cold salt until what once kept you warm on deck now pulls you relentlessly down. Boots, stiff with leather and iron buckles, feel like buckets, heavy enough to snap your legs downward even as you flail upward. The sea knows leverage, and it drags with perfect efficiency. The unlucky men in armor suffer most. A breastplate, once the pride of a soldier, becomes a coffin lid the moment it touches brine. Chainmail, so carefully hammered and riveted link by link, is nothing more than a fishing net that catches its own wearer. The knights, who once strutted tall on deck with swords clattering against their thighs, now vanish fastest of all, their valor waded into silence. They do not thrash for long. A few bubbles, a muffled scream, then gone. It is not courage or cowardice that kills them. It is gravity, assisted by iron. Even the lightly dressed fare no better. A tunic might not seem heavy, but the instant it clings, it drags. It tangles around arms and legs, wrapping tighter the more you twist. The sailor who once laughed about being quicker than any knight now finds his limbs bound by sodden cloth. He tries to tear it free, but the fabric stretches, clings, refuses to let go. The ocean has dressed him for the grave. He cannot tell where his body ends and the water begins, only that both are sinking together. Weapons betray their owners too. A sword, carefully sharpened, does nothing against 1,000 tons of seawater pressing in from all sides. Daggers, axes, even the smallest knife on a belt drags like a lead weight. Some men, in their panic, try to unsheath blades, hacking wildly at straps and cords. But panic and precision never share the same breath. The blade catches on fabric, slips against wet skin, carves open a palm or thigh. Now the sea has blood, as well as bodies. The man who thought to cut himself free is dragged down faster, weakened, thrashing in crimson trails that dissipate as quickly as his strength. For the few who realize the trap, a terrible choice remains. Do you strip in the water, fumbling at buckles with numb fingers, tearing off clothes as the sea presses in, exposing your naked body to the freezing depths? Some try. They fight their boots, shaking them loose while swallowing mouthfuls of brine. They shrug out of cloaks, rip at belts, fling daggers away into the dark. But time is not on their side. A man can only hold his breath for so long, and the sea always demands patience. One layer of clothing gone, another still clings. A boot slides off, but another sticks. In the end, the frantic undressing buys only moments, never salvation. The ship's cargo joins in the betrayal. Barrels split open, scattering iron tools and coils of rope into the water. Crates burst, spilling nails, horseshoes, and other mercantile goods that sink faster than the men who carried them. A desperate swimmer collides with a floating plank, reaches for it, and is dragged back as the nails within his pouch finish their work. Others reach for coils of rope, thinking to hold on, but rope is as cruel as it is loyal. It tangles legs, twists around throats, and knots tighter when strained. In the chaos, the difference between lifeline and strangler's noose vanishes. The sea does not even need to be deep. Even in the shallows near shore, the pull is the same. The villagers who rushed to the exposed sands with baskets of fish now find their own woven garments betraying them. A simple wool dress becomes a death shroud when soaked. A heavy cloak drags a man to his knees, then under. The fish he once scooped from the ground flop free, swimming past him as he sinks. The bounty of the retreat becomes the weight of the return. Some men scream for help, but help is useless here. No one can swim, no one dares dive, and even if they tried, they too would be claimed by their own clothes before they reached a drowning comrade. There are no rescues, no heroic pulls from the water, no dramatic gasps of survival at the last moment. Each man is on his own, bound to his garments, betrayed by his tools. The only aid the sea allows is the sight of another man sinking beside you, his eyes wide, his arms reaching out in futility. Misery here is always shared, but survival never is. What makes it all the more pitiful is how sudden the betrayal feels. On deck, these garments and tools were life. Boots protected feet from splinters, cloaks shielded against the spray, armor promised safety in battle, swords defended against pirates or beasts. But here, the balance flips instantly. What was life above the water is death below it. The line is thin, measured in heartbeats, and there is no going back once it is crossed. The sea does not rage or howl as it takes them. It does not need to. It knows the weights will do its work. The wool will cling tighter. The boots will fill fuller. The iron will press heavier. Downward, always downward. One after another, men vanish into the dark, and with each disappearance, the ocean grows quieter, smoother, as though swallowing its victims has calmed it. You think you might fight it longer than the others, that you might kick harder, claw more desperately, find some floating timber to cling to, but the clothes are already tightening, the boots tugging, the water filling your ears and mouth. You are no different. You are not spared. You sink like a stone. The sea does not kill cleanly. It has no single weapon, no neat executioner's tool, only 1,000 small instruments of ruin scattered in every direction. When the ship broke apart, it scattered its bones like a wounded beast lashing out with claws. The timbers that once framed the deck now slice through the water like spears, their jagged ends catching flesh, splitting skulls, opening bellies. Planks, once smoothed by calloused hands and tar, turn into blades under the pressure of the wave. A man who survived the first plunge finds his arm torn open by a shard of oak before he can take a second breath. Another, still clinging to life, is pinned against the surge by a spar longer than the mast itself, his ribs cracked beneath it, until the sea rushes in through his mouth and finishes what the wood began. Rope too becomes an enemy. Coils unspool and tangle, but they do not loosen. They twist around legs and throats, pull men together in writhing knots. Two sailors who once drank side by side in port now die entwined in the same rope, faces pressed together as the ocean drags them deeper. They thrash, choke, and finally still, bound like cargo delivered into the abyss. Nets spill into the water, weighted with stones, and scoop up men instead of fish. The sea is efficient. It recycles every tool you once trusted. Then comes the cargo itself. Barrels of salted fish burst and turn the water into a cloud of scales and flesh, attracting attention from below. The sharks, already drawn by the blood, now glide closer, their movements calm, unhurried, as if they have waited for this storm. They do not need to chase in frenzy. The prey is already broken, already flailing, already bleeding. A gray shadow passes beneath a sailor clutching a spar for buoyancy, and then he is gone in a churn of water and foam. The bite is not even the worst part, the tearing after, the dragging back into the deep, the way the man's scream cuts short into bubbles. Smaller fish join in. Teeth that once scraped barnacles from hulls now rip chunks from thighs and hands. Even eels, disturbed from their hiding places in shattered cargo, coil around legs and sink needle mouths into bare skin. The sea is opportunistic. It wastes nothing, takes everything. Death is not delivered in a single stroke, but in countless nicks, bites, cuts, and crushes that add up too quickly for a body to resist. Above, the wreckage rains down like a storm of splinters. Each wave hurls fragments into the air, only to smash them down again with crushing force. A man raises his head for air only to be struck by a beam the size of a tree. His skull cracks, and he disappears under red water. Another clings to a broken hatch, thinking it a raft, until another wave slams it sideways into his chest and caves it in. The survivors do not ride the wreckage, they are impaled by it, beaten by it, dragged under by it. What looks like salvation at a distance is ruin when it arrives. Every breath becomes an injury. Salt water sears the throat, rips at the lungs, fills the belly until it feels like drinking poison. Men cough blood into the sea, mixing with the froth, their last gasps turning into rasping chokes. The salt burns cuts raw, doubling the agony of every splinter lodged beneath the skin. The eyes sting until vision blurs, until shapes become indistinguishable shadows would, shark or man, all the same. The sea does not need to blind you. It only needs to confuse you until the next blow lands. The noise makes it worse. The crash of timbers colliding, the groan of shattered beams grinding together, the snap of masts breaking apart it is like listening to the earth itself being dismantled. Beneath it all is the roar of the sea, unceasing, deafening, pressing into your skull as though it intends to split your mind apart along with your body. And threaded through the chaos are the screams, raw and unending, until they too are swallowed by water. Some try to fight back, striking at the wreckage, kicking at the fish, thrashing toward the surface with arms heavy and torn. Their movements are wild, desperate, but they are already too weak, too bloodied. Every kick drains more strength. Every gasp brings more salt water. The sharks and the splinters wait patiently. Survival is not a contest here. It is a delay. Others give in more quickly. Some float face down, limbs slack, their clothes fanning around them as if the sea itself has claimed their corpses as banners. Some sink silently, pulled by boots and belts, swallowed without protest. Death is not uniform. It chooses its pace for each man, slow for one, sudden for another, but always final. The ocean is not content to kill only the men. It consumes the ship too, piece by piece. What was once a vessel, proud and whole, is now only shards and splinters drifting in bloody foam. The ocean chews on it like gristle, breaking it down until even the largest beams are reduced to drifting wreckage. What survives above the surface is not a shipwreck but a graveyard, a floating field of debris and corpses, a banquet laid out for the sea's scavengers. And still, the violence does not stop. Waves continue to smash survivors against wreckage, to churn the water into froth where teeth and wood can do their work unseen. The storm does not grow tired. It does not relent. Every moment, another body breaks, another limb is cut, another scream turns to silence. It is not a single death. It is thousands of small deaths delivered all at once. There is no dignity left. A sailor's body may be stripped of clothes by the tearing sea, his blood marking him for the sharks, his limbs shredded by planks before he ever has the chance to drown. The sea takes men apart in pieces, and when it has finished, it will scatter them in currents until nothing recognizable remains. Family and friends may wait on shore, but they will never see bodies returned. Only the ocean keeps them. Only the ocean remembers them, and it remembers in fragments. This is not the clean, sudden end promised by battle or illness. This is worse. This is death as chaos. Every element of the world turned against you. Every weapon improvised from wood, nail, tooth, and wave. It is a slow erasure, brutal and messy, where even in your final moments, you do not know what hurts, more the splinter in your chest, the shark on your leg, or the salt in your lungs. The ocean does not mind. It is thorough. It is patient, and it is never satisfied. There is no bottom, not that you will ever touch. You fall through water that seems endless, the weight of the sea pressing into every pore, filling your ears with a silence louder than any storm. Your arms flail and your legs kick, but there is no sense of progress, no rising or sinking, only the endless drag of black pulling you farther from the light above. Your lungs scream for air, but the sea does not care. It tightens around your chest like iron bands, unyielding, merciless. The world you knew, the ship, the cries, the crash of timbers vanishes almost instantly, replaced by this suffocating dark that feels less like a place and more like a grave already sealed. Medieval men knew this terror without ever descending into it. They stood on decks, stared over the rail into night seas, and whispered stories of what waited below. They did not imagine emptiness. Emptiness was too human, too bare. They imagined teeth, tentacles, the eyes of monsters vast enough to see them from miles away. They pictured serpents coiled around the roots of the world, demons gnawing at the beams of creation, creatures that dragged ships down not with chance but with hunger. And when a man sank beneath the waves, he was not swallowed by water. In their mind she was taken by something. As you plunge, those visions come alive, for the dark plays tricks. Shapes appear where there are none. Shadows move, though there is nothing to cast them. The cold touches you in places that feel like hands, gripping, tugging, pulling you deeper. A brush of seaweed across the ankle becomes a claw. A drifting fish becomes a monster's eye. Fear paints the void with horrors more vivid than any reality, and your mind, already starving for air, offers no resistance. Every glimmer, every shift, every touch becomes a threat. You are never alone in the deep. Above, light dwindles until it fades entirely, leaving only a faint memory of brightness somewhere far, far beyond reach. It is not simply that you cannot see, it is that you no longer know which way to swim. Up and down become meaningless. The body thrashes in every direction, wasting precious energy in blind panic, until the effort itself becomes the trap. The water presses in colder now, each degree stealing strength, numbing muscles, slowing the very will to resist. Drowning is not only force, it is surrender. And yet, in that surrender, the imagination does not quiet, it grows louder. The medieval sailor believed the sea was alive, that it watched him, judged him, chose when to strike. He believed that prayers might appease the spirits of the deep, that charms sewn into sleeves could ward off drowning, that a coin tossed into the foam might purchase safe passage from the unseen lords below. But once dragged under, he knew those protections meant nothing. There was no saint to intercede, no relic to shine in the dark. There was only the judgment of the ocean, which was always guilty. The black below is not merely vast, it is eternal. In their minds, the deep had no end, a bottomless pit that swallowed more than bodies. It devoured memories, names, entire ships, whole towns, if the stories were to be believed. A man who sank would never return, not his bones, not his soul, not even his story, unless another survived to tell it. The ocean kept secrets better than any grave, and the fear of it was not simply death but erasure. To drown was to vanish utterly, as though you had never walked the earth at all. Even in that final descent, when lungs burn and limbs twitch in useless spasms, there is one last surge of terror, the certainty that something waits. The black below is not empty in the imagination, it is crowded, teeming with leviathans that glide without sound, with serpents whose coils span horizons, with pale hands of drowned men who never rose again. They are all down there, lurking in silence, ready to claim another. The ocean is not just a grave, it is a kingdom, and you are entering it as prey. Bubbles stream upward from your mouth, rising in columns that flash for an instant before disappearing into the dark. They are the last proof that there is still air inside you, still something human clinging to survival. But the sea is greedy. It rips even those bubbles away, scattering them like coins into the abyss. Each gasp pulls in more salt. Each swallow makes the body heavier, and soon the struggle fades. Your eyes sting, but you open them anyway, desperate for some and anything the black. What greets you is nothing, the nothing that feels like a gaze. For medieval men, drowning was not simply dying. It was judgment carried out by forces older than kings and more powerful than armies. They believed their sins weighed them down, that God himself had loosed the sea upon them, that monsters of the deep were merely servants of divine wrath. To die in the ocean was to be claimed by it forever, denied burial, denied prayer, denied the final rites that bound men to memory. Even in heaven, they feared, no one would know their names. And yet, the sea does not need such stories to terrify. The endless black is horror enough, vast beyond comprehension, silent beyond endurance, cold beyond mercy. You sink into it with the certainty that nothing waits at the end, not a bottom, not a monster, not even the comfort of solid ground. Only more dark, more pressure, more silence, until every last thought dissolves. And whether or not monsters exist, you feel their teeth. The imagination ensures you are never alone. The ocean ensures you are never remembered. Together, they drag you down into the endless black below, where light dies, prayers fail, and hope does not follow. They are not dead yet, and that is the cruelest part. A handful of men break the surface, coughing, their arms flailing in blind desperation, until one finds a plank, another a barrel, another a jagged spar floating like a tooth in the water. They clutch at it with bleeding fingers, the salt stinging every cut, their bodies shivering from cold and shock. In the chaos, survival feels like victory, as if these scraps of wood are shields against a force far too large to comprehend. The truth, however, waits patiently for them to realize it. The wreckage bobs and shifts, never stable, always threatening to roll. A man kicks too hard and his barrel slips away, spinning into the black. Another tries to clamber onto a plank and only manages to flip it, dunking both himself and his fellow into the water again. Their grip is tenuous, their strength already fraying, but still they cling, because what else can they do? They whisper prayers through chattering teeth, bargaining with saints who cannot hear them, their words lost to the hiss of the retreating wave. Above them, the night sky offers no warmth, no light, no comfort. Clouds blot out the moon, leaving only a smear of darkness pressing against the horizon. Every gust of wind cuts deeper, a knife against skin soaked and raw. The men imagine rescue, perhaps another ship appearing out of the gloom, perhaps the shore not far away. But rescue is a fantasy, and the shore, though it may exist, is unreachable, hidden by miles of black water and the relentless current that carries them farther with every heartbeat. They talk to one another at first, trading words like currency, hoping that sound alone might keep despair at bay. Some laugh bitterly, muttering that it is a miracle they still draw breath, while others insist that God has spared them for a purpose. A few fall silent, their eyes wide and unblinking, focused on nothing as their minds fold inward. It is too soon for them to admit what they know deep down. Clinging to wreckage only prolongs the inevitable. Salt dries in their mouths, burning their throats even as they choke on it. They are thirsty, impossibly thirsty, surrounded by water that will only kill them faster if they drink. Muscles cramp and lock, fingers grow stiff, and still they cling, every second an act of stubborn defiance. One man closes his eyes and imagines his wife's face. Another whispers the names of his children. Another recites psalms until his voice fades to nothing. Memory is all they have left to warm them, but memory cannot keep the sea at bay. When the cold sets fully into their bones, it is almost merciful. The shivering stops. Their jaws go slack, their breathing shallow, and they drift into a state that feels like half sleep. The wreckage that once felt like salvation now feels like chains, tying them to the surface when sinking might be easier. Some lose their grip without even realizing, slipping quietly beneath the waves. No splash, no scream, just gone. Others still fight, thrashing weakly, cursing the ocean, cursing their fate, cursing themselves for not dying quicker when the ship went under. The darkness does not relent. Hours stretch into an endless blur. There is no dawn, not yet, only the endless monotony of cold water and aching limbs. Hope ebbs away as surely as the tide, leaving only the hollow instinct to hold on, even when holding on no longer means anything. A man might convince himself he sees land on the horizon, a smudge of safety where none exists. Another might swear he hears bells, the sound of a harbor calling. These are not miracles. They are the last tricks of a mind unraveling. Eventually, their prayers falter. The promises made to saints, the bargains whispered into the void, all go unanswered. Even faith cannot survive this long in silence. One by one, they stop speaking altogether, their lips moving without sound, their eyes half closed. The sea has infinite patience. It waits for their strength to run out, for their numb fingers to slip, for their exhausted hearts to surrender. It does not hurry. It does not need to. And yet, for the men still alive, every second feels like defiance. To cling to a broken plank in the middle of a dark, endless ocean is to shout into the face of death, even if the shout never leaves your throat. But the ocean does not care for defiance. It takes them in its own time, stripping them of warmth, of breath, of will, until only the wreckage floats, silent and unburdened, carrying no more prayers upon it. Survival was never in their hands. It was only an illusion, a cruel reprieve that stretched their suffering a little longer. In the end, the sea claims them all, and the wreckage drifts on without them, empty and useless, until even it is lost to the waves. At first, it is just a dryness in the throat, the kind of parched sting that might be soothed by a sip of wine or a dipper of fresh water. But there is no wine here, no barrels of clean liquid waiting below deck. The ship is gone. The men who cling to wreckage or drift on splintered planks are surrounded by nothing but the same endless sea that has swallowed their vessel. And the longer they float, the sharper the dryness becomes, until it feels as though their tongues have swollen, as though their throats are lined with thorns. Hunger gnaws at them too, but hunger is slow, a dull ache that can be ignored. Thirst is merciless. Thirst rules every thought, every prayer, every desperate breath. The cruelest part is that water is everywhere. It laps against their faces, sprays into their eyes, soaks every inch of cloth and hair. It mocks them, sliding across their lips with every wave, tempting them with a sweetness that is only imagined. They know, at least at first, that it will kill them faster than leaving their mouths dry. They remember stories of shipwrecks, of sailors gone mad from drinking the sea. But knowing and resisting are different things, and knowledge becomes weaker with every hour the salt burns their throats. Some fight the temptation longer than others. They press their mouths shut, biting down on the inside of their cheeks until they taste their own blood. They whisper to themselves, reminding their bodies that to drink is to die. Yet the body does not listen. The body craves survival at any cost, even if the cost is the very thing that will undo it. Eventually, one breaks. He scoops up handfuls of seawater, splashing it into his mouth with shaking hands, gulping like a man starved. The others watch in silence, some horrified, some envious, some already feeling the same urge clawing at their chests. It feels good in the moment, that first swallow. Coolness floods the throat, washing away the rawness, tricking the brain into believing relief has come. For a few minutes, the man seems revived, even smiling through cracked lips, water dripping from his chin. But the salt works quickly. The more he drinks, the more his cells scream in protest, pulling water out of themselves until every part of him shrivels. His lips split wider, his tongue swells, and his stomach rebels, cramping and twisting. He vomits, but still he drinks again, driven by a thirst that only deepens the more he tries to quench it. Others follow. One by one they surrender, too weak to resist the call. They scoop seawater into their mouths with frantic greed, or lower their heads directly to the surface, sucking it in like animals at a trough. Each swallow is another nail in their coffins, but desperation blinds them. Soon they are coughing, retching, spitting, and drinking again. Madness creeps in through their eyes, a wild glassiness that replaces reason with frenzy. They babble nonsense, laugh at nothing, cry out for mothers and saints, claw at their own throats, as though trying to rip the salt back out. The body deteriorates quickly under such punishment. Skin cracks, lips bleed, tongues blacken at the edges. The men grow restless, jerking and twitching, as though invisible hands are tugging at their limbs. Their minds unravel faster than their flesh, hallucinations flickering behind their eyes. Some claim to see land on the horizon, golden and green, only to weep when it vanishes. Others insist angels hover just above the waves, beckoning with glowing hands. One man swears he sees a tavern sign bobbing in the water, painted with a mug of ale, and he dives after it, never resurfacing. The survivors who resist, who grit their teeth and endure the torment of thirst without drinking, are not spared from despair. They must watch as their companions wither and convulse, as once strong men dissolve into gibbering wrecks who claw at the ocean as though it were both enemy and salvation. They hear the cries, the groans, the choking sounds, and know that the same fate waits for them if they give in. But resisting is its own torment. Their mouths are deserts, their throats fire, and every splash of seawater against their skin is torture. It is a battle they fight minute by minute, and every minute feels like a century. Time stretches, broken into fragments of suffering. By the second day, those who drank too much seawater are dying outright. Their bodies seize, their eyes roll back, their limbs stiffen before they sink. The ocean swallows them without ceremony, pulling them down in silence. The wreckage drifts lighter, carrying fewer men than before. Those who remain are gaunt and broken, lips chewed raw, eyes hollow. They do not speak anymore. There is no strength for words, only the rasp of ragged breathing and the sound of the waves mocking them. Salt water is no longer just the sea they float upon. It is inside them, coursing through veins, poisoning their blood, tightening its grip with every hour. Even those who resisted drinking cannot escape it, for every wound and every scratch has been steeped in brine. Infection creeps in, unseen but inevitable. Salt is everywhere, burning eyes, cracking skin, blistering flesh until they are more salt than man. The thirst never ends. It sharpens, gnaws, and howls inside their skulls until nothing remains of reason. For some, the last act of life is to surrender, lowering their heads and drinking deeply, letting the sea rush in, no longer caring about the price. For others, the end comes in silence, their hands loosening from the plank, their faces sinking below, lips still moving in wordless prayers. Salt water was never their friend. It carried them, it offered itself endlessly, and in the end, it consumed them. Not by storm, not by wave, but by thirst, the slowest, cruelest death of all. The sea does not let go of its victims quickly. Once the great wave has done its violence and the ship lies shattered, the survivors discover that death is not always swift. It lingers, slow and merciless, dragging itself out hour after hour. The men who cling to wreckage are no longer sailors. They are stripped of identity, reduced to bodies struggling to endure. The ocean has already claimed their companions in minutes. For them, survival feels like an insult. At first, there is only the numb disbelief of still being alive. Their ears ring from the roar of the wave, their eyes sting with salt, and every breath is a ragged rasp torn from lungs half filled with water. They grip planks and barrels with trembling hands, coughing up what they swallowed, praying quietly, or muttering to themselves. For a moment, survival feels possible. The worst is over, they think. The sea has done its worst. They could not be more wrong. When the sun rises, it reveals the true cruelty of survival. It climbs into the sky without pity, a merciless torch that presses down on the drifting men until they feel cooked within their own skins. Salt dries on their faces in crystalline patches, splitting lips and tightening eyelids until every blink is pain. Their clothes, soaked and heavy, grow hot and chafe against blistering skin. The surface of the water gleams so brightly it blinds them, forcing them to squint against a horizon that offers no salvation. The sun does not merely warm, it burns. It turns pale, skin scarlet, boiling shoulders and necks until the slightest touch against wood is agony. It bakes every droplet of seawater into a crust of salt that eats into cuts and scrapes, so that every shift of the body feels like fire under the flesh. Some men, already delirious with thirst, stick out their tongues to catch the salt spray as if it were rain, only to curse when the sting deepens the torment. They do not know why they feel worse as the hours stretch on. They cannot name dehydration, cannot picture the body shrinking inward as it loses what little fresh water it contains. All they know is that their tongues swell like lumps of leather, their mouths become deserts, and their bellies ache with hollow fire. They mistake the pounding in their heads for some punishment of the gods, a curse placed upon them for sins unspoken. Some beg forgiveness aloud, calling to saints or to Neptune, offering promises they will never live to keep. Others only groan, the effort of words already too much. As the day passes, strength drains. Fingers cramp against the wood, legs dangle uselessly in the waves, and eyes glaze over. Heat shimmers on the horizon, mirages of land and forests and rivers that vanish when they blink. The survivors try to shade themselves with hands or torn cloth, but nothing works. They are roasted alive, dried out, and cracked like meat left too long on a spit. And yet, as much as they curse the sun, they dread what comes next even more. Night. The sea at night is not calm, not gentle. It is cold, a creeping, endless chill that seeps into bone and marrow. The men, already weakened by thirst and burns, find themselves shivering violently as the last light dies. Teeth chatter so hard they split lips. The same water that scalded them by day now leaches every scrap of heat from their bodies. Their soaked clothes, which in the sunlight had felt unbearable, now cling with icy weight, dragging them further into the cold. They huddle against planks, curl up as tightly as the wreckage allows, but there is no shelter. The cold is everywhere. They do not know the word hypothermia. They do not understand why their hands refuse to grip, why their speech slurs, why their shivers grow weaker even as the chill deepens. They only know the terror of losing control, of watching fingers go pale and stiff, of feeling thoughts slow until even prayer is too heavy. Some slip silently from their planks, sinking into the black water as though pulled by invisible hands. Others fight longer, thrashing weakly, begging the stars for warmth that never comes. The hours stretch without end. The night is not a passage, but a sentence, each minute longer than the last. The cold gnaws through flesh and into spirit, and yet when the first faint gray of dawn touches the horizon, relief does not come. It is only the promise of another round of torment, another day of burning, another night of freezing, and another slow step toward death. By the second cycle, the survivors are scarcely men at all. They are cracked lips, blistered shoulders, swollen tongues. They are numb fingers and rattling lungs. They float between two extremes: boiling sun and freezing night-like meat on a spit turned endlessly over a fire. Each rotation strips away another piece of strength, another fragment of humanity. Some go mad, laughing at the sun, cursing the moon, singing songs to the stars with voices too dry to carry. Others are silent, eyes glassy, staring only at the horizon as if sheer will could summon land. The cruel truth is that neither fire nor ice is survivable for long. A man without water cannot last more than a few days, even if the sea spares him its teeth. Exposure does not kill quickly. It toys with its prey, burning, freezing, cracking, and breaking until death feels like relief. There are no remedies, no medicines, no understanding of the forces at work. These men cannot name what is happening to them. They only know that the sun feels like a whip, the night like a shroud, and both together like a prison with no door. The survivors cling, because clinging is all they have left. They grip splinters and barrels with hands that bleed. They float half-conscious under skies that show no mercy, and they endure the endless cycle of torment until endurance itself runs out. In the end, the sea does not need waves to kill them. It has time, it has sun, it has cold, and it has them. The water is quiet at first, deceptively so. After the wreck, after the screaming, after the last of the ship has vanished beneath the surface, there is only the sound of waves lapping against wood and the hoarse breaths of the men who remain. They cling to shattered planks, to barrels, to anything that floats, and they tell themselves the worst is over. The sea has taken their vessel, their comrades, their hopes, but at least they are still breathing. At least they have survived. For now. But the sea is not done with them. Beneath the floating wreckage, the world has already changed. The blood of the drowned, the fluids of the dead, the churned splinters of cargo and hull have spread into the current like a signal. It is invisible to human eyes, but to those that glide through the depths, it is a beacon, the scent of iron, of rot, of meat, and it calls to them. The first shadows appear in the distance, sliding beneath the survivors without a sound. A dorsal fin cuts the surface for an instant, vanishing again so quickly it might have been imagined. A ripple disturbs the water just beyond reach, then is gone. The men, exhausted and half delirious, do not notice at first. They are too focused on the burning of their skin, the weight of their soaked clothes, the ache of their swollen tongues. But the sharks are patient. They circle. They test. They wait for weakness to reveal itself. It does not take long. A cry erupts from one of the men, shrill and broken. He thrashes against his plank, kicking wildly, as red blooms beneath him in the water. The survivors around him can only watch as the sea seems to swallow him whole. There is a flurry of motion, a froth of white, and then he is gone. A single sandal floats to the surface, spinning slowly as if mocking the silence that follows. The others now understand. Terror spreads faster than flame. Men clutch their wreckage tighter, pull their legs up out of the water, scream prayers to saints and gods who will not answer. They slap at the waves as if they can push the predators back, but the sharks do not care for prayers or fists. They smell blood, they smell fear, and they come closer. The next strike is quicker, more violent. A man is pulled from his barrel with such force that the wood spins free, drifting empty. His scream cuts across the water, rising, choking, and then breaking off in a gurgle. His arm breaches the surface once, fingers clawing at nothing, before disappearing in a red swirl. The sea begins to taste of iron, and the sharks grow bolder. The survivors are trapped. The wreckage that saves them from drowning now pins them in place, leaving them floating targets. Every splash, every frantic kick, every drop of blood leaking from scraped hands or gashed feet is another invitation. The sharks move faster now, darting between the beams, their tails lashing currents that tug at the men's legs. They bump the planks from beneath, testing, knocking, sowing panic. Some men try to climb higher onto the floating wood, but it only flips, dumping them back into the water where the circling shadows are waiting. And then the frenzy begins. It happens without warning, as though some unseen signal has been given. The sharks erupt in a storm of teeth and muscle, each lunging to claim its share. The water boils with violence. Bodies vanish beneath the surface, dragged down before they can scream. Others are torn apart where they cling, the wreckage around them stained with splashes of red that spread like oil. A man clutching a spar feels it ripped from him as a jaw clamps around his waist. The plank drifts on, clean, while he is wrenched into pieces. Another is seized by the leg, spun in circles so fast his cries turn to bubbles. His companions watch in horror as the sea around him explodes in a froth of blood, chunks, and foam. The smell alone becomes unbearable, a rank mixture of salt and gore that hangs in the air. Survivors gag as they cling tighter, but there is no looking away. They cannot close their eyes to the shapes darting beneath them, the flashes of pale bellies and black eyes, the gaping maws studded with endless rows of teeth. The sound is worse. The snapping of jaws, the tearing of flesh, the muffled shrieks swallowed by water. Some men try to swim for it, believing movement will save them, but the sea punishes them for the attempt. A stroke or two and they are struck, dragged under, their struggles leaving only a froth of bubbles in their wake. The water is alive with predators now, each bite fueling the frenzy of the others, and the surface itself feels hostile, trembling with violence beneath the drifting wood. And then, suddenly, silence. The frenzy ends as quickly as it began. The sea calms, the foam dissipates. The blood, though thick, begins to drift apart into streaks and ribbons. The survivors breathe raggedly, staring at one another with wide, horrified eyes, counting who is left. A handful remain, pale and trembling, their bodies trembling not only with exhaustion, but with the knowledge of what still lurks beneath them. The sharks are not gone. They never leave. They circle again, slower this time, more deliberate, waiting for weakness to show. The men can feel the water shift with their movements, can see the faint shadows brushing beneath their dangling legs. Each one knows he is next. Every creak of wood, every splash of wave, every sudden bump from below sends terror spiking through their chests. Some begin to sob openly, shaking their heads, whispering broken prayers. Others grow eerily silent, their gazes locked on the horizon as if they can will land to appear. None of it matters. The predators do not tire. They are not sated. They are only waiting. And the men, burned, frozen, thirsting, broken, can do nothing but wait with them, knowing the sea has already chosen their end. The first man to shout sees it between the swell of waves, a dark ridge rising above the foam. He hollers with a cracked voice, pointing with one trembling arm, and instantly the others seize on the vision like a starving man on a crust of bread. "Land," they whisper. "Land at last." They clutch the planks tighter. They paddle with what little strength remains, their eyes locked on the mirage of salvation. Every beat of their hearts hammers against their ribs as though freedom lies only a few strokes away. The sea itself seems to lift them toward it, each crest carrying them closer to the dream. The image becomes more convincing the longer they stare. A jagged line across the horizon, shadowed against the gray sky, unmoving while the waves heave and collapse around it. In their delirium, it takes on the shape of cliffs, of beaches, of trees bending in some imagined breeze. They begin to murmur of home, of walking barefoot on sand, of collapsing into grass that will never let them sink. Some even laugh, shrill and hysterical, certain the nightmare has cracked and that the earth has remembered them after all. But the sea is crueler than their hopes. As they drift closer, the shape sharpens not into solid land, but into something fractured and broken. The dark ridges resolve into beams, snapped ends pointing to the sky like skeletal fingers. Barrels bob among them, casks split, and leaking their spoiled contents into the waves. A tangle of ropes and half-shattered spars floats beneath, turning with the current in a mockery of the living. It is not a shoreline at all. It is the graveyard of their ship, scattered across the water like bones flung by some great beast. The realization dawns slowly, then all at once. One man groans, slumping against his plank. Another curses so violently it burns his throat raw. Their whispers of salvation turn to silence, punctuated only by the groan of timber as another piece of wreckage rolls beneath the waves. The false hope gnaws deeper than despair ever could. It had offered them light and then smothered it, leaving them in a darkness that tastes even more bitter than before. Yet the mind clings to any illusion, no matter how thin. Some still insist it might be an island. Perhaps the splinters are trees, perhaps the barrels are huts. Perhaps if they just push harder, swim faster, the truth will be revealed. They kick weakly toward the wreckage, convinced that salvation still hides inside the lie. The stronger ones know better, but they lack the strength to stop them. They watch as the desperate paddle through floating beams slick with pitch and oil, their hands shredded on splinters, their legs bruised by drifting casks. A man seizes on a barrel, hugging it like a savior. But the barrel is half full of water, heavy and unstable. It rolls as he clings tighter, turning him beneath the surface and dragging him under until his grip slips and his body drifts free. Another claws onto a half-broken spar that tips him violently side to side, each wave nearly knocking him off until he surrenders and lets go, returning to his plank in defeated silence. The false shoreline offers no aid, only new hazards. The sea knows how to sharpen its cruelty. What they had taken for the curve of earth now becomes the stench of death. The wreckage bleeds rot into the waves. Barrels of salted fish burst open, slicking the surface with oil that stings the eyes and coats their lips. Pieces of cargo bump against them, cloth soaked heavy with seawater. Iron nails freed from split beams, sacks of flour turned to foul paste that mixes with the blood still spreading from earlier attacks. Every item that drifts by reminds them not of life, but of how completely their world has been torn apart. The sharks, too, are not fooled. They slide among the debris, their fins cutting around the floating planks, their bodies brushing against barrels, as if this graveyard is their hunting ground. The scent of rotting cargo mingles with human blood, and the predators are patient. Survivors who try to cling to the wreckage find themselves only deeper in the killing zone, surrounded by shadows that shift beneath their feet. Some scream and abandon the chase for land, paddling back toward the emptier waters, but the truth has already poisoned them. Their dream of salvation has turned to an image of hell, and yet the illusion lingers in their minds, too strong to release entirely. Even as they drift away from the splintered ruin, their eyes are drawn back to it. The human heart is too stubborn to stop searching for safety, even in places where death wears it like a mask. They imagine again that perhaps beyond the floating bones lies a real island. Perhaps if they could only pass through the graveyard of their ship, the sea would grant them sand instead of salt. But the sea is merciless. It does not deal in kindness, only in punishment, and every moment spent among the wreckage chips away at what little strength they still possess. They cough on oil, gag on rot, choke on foam. They scrape their hands raw against barnacle-crusted wood and wince at the sting of salt in their cuts. Their arms ache until they can no longer paddle. Their legs cramp from endless kicking, and the false shoreline drifts away behind them just as cruelly as it had appeared. By the time they understand fully, it is too late. The wreckage has claimed another share of lives, not by splinter or by shark, but by the simple cruelty of hope. Hope had given them reason to struggle harder, to waste the last of their strength chasing what could never be real. Now, broken, shivering, parched, and stung by sun and salt, they drift in silence. Some stare upward at the blank sky. Others close their eyes against it. None speak of land again. The sea has a way of teaching final lessons. And for these men, it is that salvation was never waiting. There is no shore, only wreckage, only hunger, only the endless water, stretching farther than their minds can comprehend, swallowing every prayer before it can rise. And somewhere, in the haze of heat and exhaustion, they realize the cruelest truth of all. The false shoreline was the closest thing to rescue they will ever see. The wave that destroyed the ship did not stop at sea. It carried its fury into the shallows, where fishermen mended nets and children played in sand that had always seemed so solid. Along the low harbors of the coast, there was no sound of alarm, no bell rung in warning, no voice raised against the impossible. The tide pulled back first, exposing mudflats and stranded fish, leaving boats listing awkwardly on their keels. Curious villagers wandered down to watch, puzzled by the sudden emptiness, some wading knee-deep to snatch the flopping catch. They had never seen the sea retreat so far, so fast. They had no way of knowing what followed. The horizon rose against them like a wall, its color not sky but churning green, its edge not gentle curve but jagged white teeth. In the few seconds they had before it broke, the water made it sound a roar deeper than thunder, a grinding like stone upon stone. It was not the sound of a storm, but of the world collapsing. Birds screamed overhead and fled inland, but the people below were rooted in place, gazing at something their minds could not reconcile. Even when they turned and ran, their steps were too slow, their paths too short. The waves struck with such violence that buildings seemed to dissolve rather than collapse. Timber beams snapped and flew as though they were no heavier than twigs. Stone walls, centuries old, crumbled under the weight of water, grinding into rubble that churned with boats, animals, and bodies. The harbor was gone in an instant, replaced by a chaos of foam and shattered wood. Families that had lived for generations beside the tide vanished in a single rush, swept inland with all they had built. The sea reclaimed its edge, and more besides. Inland hills bore witness. Survivors who scrambled to higher ground turned to see not their homes, but an ocean where fields had been, swirling with the remnants of entire lives. Livestock floated beside half-sunk carts, church bells clanged underwater, and rooftops bobbed where they had no right to be. The shoreline itself was erased, as though the hand of God had dragged it clean with one brutal stroke. For days afterward, the wreckage continued to wash up. Splintered beams came first, then casks and barrels, then unrecognizable debris tangled in weed and rope. Bodies followed. Fishermen who ventured to the beaches wept openly at the sight of neighbors tangled in nets, children pale and bloated as driftwood, sailors still clutching broken planks as though salvation might yet appear. The sea gave nothing back whole. Everything it returned was broken, swollen, shattered. Medieval Europe had no words for tsunami. Chroniclers reached for the language of judgment, calling it divine wrath, a punishment for sins too terrible to name. Priests led processions along ruined coasts, carrying relics and chanting for mercy, though even their voices faltered when faced with entire villages that no longer existed. Rumor spread inland of sea dragons stirring from the deep, of God shaking the waters as a warning, of witches calling storms too vast for human eyes. The terror lay not only in what had been lost, but in the sheer incomprehensibility of what had happened. The economic toll spread like ripples. Fishing fleets, the lifeblood of countless communities, were reduced to driftwood. Markets that had thrived on salted herring and fresh catch fell silent, their stalls empty, their coinage drying up. Inland towns starved slowly as the flow of food ceased, grain prices rising beyond the reach of peasants who had already lost kin to the wave. Trade faltered. Where once ships had sailed with cloth, salt, wine, and wool, there were now only stories of wreckage and bodies on the tide. Yet history has a way of burying disaster. In time, the chronicles folded the catastrophe into tales of saints and sinners, assigning it moral meaning that dulled the horror. Children grew up hearing not of tectonic plates or seismic waves, but of God's anger at the pride of men. Ruins were rebuilt, though never as before. Some villages were abandoned outright, their people scattered inland, unwilling to trust the treacherous shore again. Others rose stubbornly from the sand, rebuilding piers and cottages in defiance, as though daring the sea to try again. And always, there were whispers of the ship. Some said it was foreign, carrying cursed cargo that drew divine punishment upon itself and the coast alike. Others swore it was the king's own vessel, laden with stolen treasures that the sea would never allow to reach port. The wreckage became legend as much as disaster, a story retold by firesides with each generation, shifting with each telling but always carrying the same truth. The sea had taken more than wood and men. It had taken certainty itself. What remains clearest, looking back, is not just the violence of the wave, but the silence that followed. Entire stretches of coast lay empty, the laughter of markets replaced by gulls circling carcasses. The salt marshes grew over abandoned paths, and grass-covered stones that had once marked homes. To stand on such ground was to feel the weight of absence, as though the land itself remembered what had been stolen. Survivors carried that absence inside them, etched deeper than scars, shaping their lives long after the waters receded. And so the aftermath was not measured only in bodies or in ruined villages, but in memory, a memory that lingered in chronicles, in whispered warnings, in prayers muttered before voyages, a memory of how fragile their world was, how little stood between safety and oblivion. They lived on, yes, but always with the knowledge that the sea which fed them could, in an instant, decide to devour them instead. Generations later, when travelers passed along those coasts, they could still hear it in the stories. A fear of the tide, a caution in the eyes of fishermen who watched the horizon too closely, a reverence for the sea that went beyond mere respect. For the wave had not only destroyed villages, it had carved itself into the soul of the land, leaving a scar no rebuilding could erase. The coastal villages were erased once, and the people rebuilt, but they never forgot. And the sea never forgave. The sea did not return its dead gently. They came ashore days later, bloated and pale, their faces unrecognizable, their limbs twisted by the currents. Entire coves filled with them, rolling in with the tide and settling among the wrack of seaweed and broken timbers. Families who dared approach the beaches searching for loved ones quickly realized the futility of hope. Each body was too swollen, too disfigured to identify except by scraps of clothing, a ring clinging to a finger, a child's sandal still tied to a foot. The stench spread faster than the truth could be spoken. Death did not end with drowning. It began again on land. Flies appeared first, in numbers so vast the air itself seemed to hum. They swarmed over corpses, laying eggs in every crevice, while gulls circled and fought viciously over scraps of flesh. Dogs slunk down from the villages, feral now, gnawing at fingers and thighs as if the men they once served were nothing more than carrion. Soon wolves came down from the hills, emboldened by the easy feast. To watch them drag a body into the dunes was to realize how quickly nature reclaimed what the wave had offered. The sea had torn life away, but the land was eager to finish the work. With the bodies came sickness. Few in the medieval world understood disease beyond curses and divine punishment, but they knew the smell of corruption. Villagers held cloths over their mouths as they tried to bury the dead, digging shallow graves in sand that the tide would wash open again. The more practical chose fire, stacking pyres along the beach that sent up columns of greasy smoke visible for miles. But the number of corpses overwhelmed every attempt. For every body burned, another two arrived with the tide, and soon the survivors abandoned the task. The beaches became fields of death, rotting in the sun, breeding plague. The sickness spread inland with terrifying speed. Children who had played among the wreckage fell feverish within days, their bodies covered in sores, their breaths turning foul. Mothers who washed the dead in futile acts of mourning sickened and collapsed beside their own doorways. Crops went untended, as entire households lay stricken, and fields browned under the summer sun. Priests, once bold enough to lead processions of penance, shrank from the dying, their prayers muffled by fear of contagion. Rumors spread that the wave had not only destroyed, but cursed the land itself. Meanwhile, hunger gnawed at the edges of every household. Fishing boats had been reduced to splinters, the men who might have sailed them already drowned or too sick to lift an oar. Stores of grain, salted meat, and dried fish had been swept away with the tide. Survivors scoured the wreckage for anything edible, prying open barrels of spoiled flour, tearing at half-rotten fruit, gnawing strips of leather softened in boiling water. Some turned to eating dogs and horses, others to darker rumors' flesh, taken not from animals, but from the sea-washed dead themselves. Starvation sharpened desperation. Bands of survivors roamed the ruined coast, fighting each other for scraps, stealing from inland farms, spreading fear wherever they stumbled. In the villages that still stood, watchmen kept torches lit through the night, guarding against not wolves or raiders but their own starving kin. The wave had destroyed not only bodies but bonds of trust, turning neighbor against neighbor, kin against kin. The line between survivor and marauder blurred, both driven by the same gnawing hunger. And yet, despite the horror, the sea kept returning its gifts. Each tide delivered more. The bodies came in all statesome newly drowned, some little more than skeletons picked clean by fish, others grotesque parodies of humanity swollen to twice their size. They tangled together with nets and timbers, drifting in like offerings to some dark god. The shoreline became a gallery of the grotesque, a reminder that the disaster had no end. People whispered that the sea had grown greedy, unwilling to release what it had claimed, and that to even walk the beach was to invite the curse upon yourself. Weeks turned into months, and still the shadow of death lingered. Fields of grain, left untended, yielded little. Markets in nearby towns remained empty, their stalls silent where once merchants had haggled over fish and salt. Entire coastal parishes were abandoned, their churches filled with silence, their bells rusting in their towers. Those who did return found themselves surrounded by ghosts, the land heavy with memory. Every creak of timber in the surf sounded like voices crying out, every gull's cry like the scream of the drowned. Medieval chroniclers, desperate to make sense of the devastation, filled their manuscripts with stories of divine wrath. Some wrote that the wave had come as punishment for greed, others that the corruption of men's souls had risen too high, demanding a cleansing. A few described it as the opening of hell itself, demons loosed from the deep, dragging sinners into the abyss and leaving only their husks behind. Whether wrath, curse, or chance, the result was the same. Death lingered on the land long after the sea had gone still. And when finally, after many months, the bodies stopped arriving, the beaches remained haunted. Survivors avoided them except to gather driftwood in dire need, and even then, they did so quickly, with prayers whispered under their breath. Children were warned never to play near the tide, and sailors crossed themselves twice before setting out. The sea was no longer a provider, no longer a path to fortune. It was a grave, vast and hungry, waiting always to take more. The dead had washed ashore, but they had not left. They lived on in memory, in sickness, in hunger, in the quiet absence that filled every ruined village. Death had not come and gone with the wave. It had settled in like a new master, patient and merciless, and it would not leave for generations. The survivors had endured the water, but they could not escape what the water left behind. The monks began writing before the smell had even left the air. Bent over their desks by candlelight, quills scratching across parchment, they sought to capture what their own eyes could not reconcile. The wave had left entire coasts in ruin, fields stripped bare, towns swept into the sea. To record it as simple catastrophe felt impossible. No accident, no mere trembling of earth could explain such fury. It had to be divine. The ink they laid down was heavy with judgment. God had grown angry. God had wiped his hand across the shore, and what remained was proof of his wrath. In abbeys perched inland, far from the stench of the drowned, scribes wrote as though the disaster were theater staged for the faithful. They copied each other's words with solemn agreement. The seas had risen not by chance, but because sin had piled too high. Prideful merchants, lustful sailors, greedy lords each, had summoned the flood with their wickedness. Every corpse rolling in with the tide was not simply a man, but a sinner weighed down by guilt. Each ruined church on the coast was a warning that no stone, however sanctified, could shield against the fury of heaven. To read their accounts was not to see a tragedy, but a sermon written in salt. But not all chroniclers bent so easily to pious explanation. Some gave the sea its own voice, a mouth that swallowed indiscriminately, a beast more ancient than Scripture. They described it as though it were alive, a leviathan rising from the abyss, summoned by forces that predated even Christ. To them the wave was not punishment but reminder, proof that the ocean was no tame servant but a devourer. The drowned were not sinners, merely victims who had wandered too close to the jaws of creation. In these accounts, the sea itself became the monster, not wrathful God but hungry chaos. Others wove stranger tales still, insisting the water had carried things with it. They wrote of shapes glimpsed in the black swell, writhing forms larger than ships, scales flashing in lightning. Survivors spoke of hands, claws, or tentacles dragging men down faster than any current could. When bodies came ashore torn apart, missing limbs, bellies ripped open, the scribes did not blame the surf. They blamed creatures from the deep, things that had tasted human flesh and would return again. These stories spread like fire in taverns, where fishermen swore that the wave had woken what had long slumbered beneath, and that every cast net now dragged up bones. The stories grew darker with each telling. Villagers whispered of omens seen in the sky before the flood, blood-red sunsets, flocks of seabirds falling dead in the fields, stars flickering as though about to fall. Priests rewrote these signs into prophecy, claiming they had been ignored warnings from heaven. When the wave struck, it became not just disaster but fulfillment of an apocalypse foretold. The sea was no longer an element, it was a herald. Those who drowned had been chosen, those who survived, spared only to repent. The end of days had brushed the shore, and might return at any moment. Manuscripts copied across Europe carried these tales far beyond the coast. Monks in the mountains, who had never seen the ocean in their lives, copied accounts of monstrous waves and divine scourging as though they themselves had stood on the cliffs. Each retelling bent the truth further. The wave grew taller with each pen stroke, its roar likened to trumpets of angels or the grinding of the world's bones. Whole kingdoms were said to have vanished, when in truth it was but villages and harbors. Yet exaggeration served purpose. It was not accuracy that mattered, but meaning. If the wave could be seen as God's finger or a beast's maw, then its horror could be given shape, its terror explained. And in time, these stories replaced the event itself. Children born after the flood knew it only through tales told at hearths or in church pews. They imagined not water, but judgment, not chaos, but vengeance. Parents used it as warning, threatening disobedient sons with the fate of the drowned, daughters with the curse of the sea that spared no beauty. Fishermen prayed louder, farmers tithed heavier, and kings cited the wave when demanding obedience. If God could erase a coast with one motion, what hope was there in resisting a crown? The disaster hardened into myth, and myth into tool. Yet scattered among the pious warnings and monstrous tales were fragments of human memory. A sailor who clung to wreckage until the tide flung him ashore told of hearing screams cut short as the water closed. A widow described watching her children torn from her arms as though by invisible hands. A priest wrote, with uncharacteristic honesty, that he had prayed not for his flock, but only for himself. These moments, fragile and brief, carried the rawness of truth. But such accounts rarely spread. They did not serve as warning or prophecy, and so they were buried beneath layers of divine rhetoric. Still, in the margins of manuscripts, monks doodled crude sketches, waves rising taller than towers, fish with human faces, ships snapped like toys. These strange drawings betray something the official texts would not admit, that the disaster had shaken belief itself. For all their proclamations of punishment and prophecy, the men who wrote the tales still feared what they could not understand. They tried to trap chaos in words, to cage it in parchment, but the drawings suggest otherwise. In their hearts they knew the sea did not care for sin or virtue. It swallowed all the same. Generations later, when people read of the wave, they no longer pictured villages torn apart or bodies bloated on beaches. They saw the wrath of God, or monsters of the deep, or signs of the apocalypse. The truth had drowned along with the sailors. What remained was story, copied and recopied until the ink itself seemed to carry weight, until the disaster belonged more to myth than to memory. The wave had destroyed lives, but the chroniclers transformed it into legend, and so the sea lived on in ink, eternal and terrible, a punishment, a monster, a prophecy, Reality had been washed away with the bodies. What remained was myth, and myth, unlike flesh, does not rot. Imagine, for a moment, the fantasy. A modern ship is lost at sea, struck by some unforeseen disaster, and the survivors scramble for the emergency gear. Bright orange life jackets bob up to the surface. Inflatable rafts deploy with compressed gas. Signal flares spit fire into the night sky. Radios scream distress calls across the waves, while satellite beacons broadcast GPS coordinates to coast guards and helicopters. Even in the worst circumstances, hope remains something tangible, something you can hold in your hand, or at least clip to your belt. You might die, but you also might be rescued. The ocean can still kill you, but you are armed with tools, knowledge, and a system designed to drag you back from its jaws. Now, rewind the scene by 700 years. The medieval sailor does not own a life jacket, has never imagined such a thing could exist. If the ship goes down, he grabs whatever floats. A barrel, a broken spar, maybe a door torn free from its hinges. There are no lifeboats, no inflatable rafts waiting to be unfurled. The ship itself is the only boat, and once it splinters, you are naked in the water. Rescue is not coming, not tomorrow, not ever. There is no Coast Guard, no search and rescue chopper circling overhead. If another vessel stumbles across you, it is only because God willed it, not because a signal flare marked your spot. Even if you imagine survival with nothing but your body, the medieval sailor is already doomed. In modern times, children are taught to swim as a matter of recreation, a rite of passage, before they are out of elementary school. In the 14th century, most men saw swimming as witchcraft, an act reserved for those touched by the devil or the desperate. To throw yourself into the sea willingly was to flirt with death. Few could paddle more than a few strokes, and fewer still could tread water long enough to outlast a single wave. Their muscles flailed, their lungs burned, and panic dragged them down faster than the waterlogged boots on their feet. Modern survival kits are stocked with desalination pumps, ration packs, and reflective blankets. The medieval sailor had nothing but the wool tunic clinging to his chest and a desperate prayer muttered between waves. Thirst would hollow him out long before hunger, and if he dared drink the ocean around him, the salt would strip his body from the inside out. Today we know the science of dehydration, the fatal spiral of salt poisoning. They did not. They only knew that the more they drank, the weaker they became, until their tongues swelled and their minds cracked like dry parchment. Death was not just in the wave that struck them, but in the very water that surrounded them. Even the smallest conveniences we take for granted would have changed everything. A whistle to signal another survivor floating in the dark. A waterproof match to light a flare. A pocket knife to cut free from tangled ropes. In their world, none of these existed. Their hands clawed at the air, nails tearing as they tried to grip slick planks, and their voices vanished into the roar of the surf. No one heard, no one came. The difference between life and death was not gear or planning it, was pure accident. Did you happen to land near a floating cask? Did the tide push you toward shore instead of dragging you farther out? These were the only variables. Luck and chance, cruel and indifferent, decided who lived for another hour and who sank in minutes. Modern survivors are drilled in procedure. Stay calm, conserve energy, huddle for warmth, don't drink seawater. Guides and manuals reduce disaster to steps and checklists, survival into a science. But in the medieval mind, disaster was not a science, but a curse. You did not endure because you were prepared. You endured if God chose to spare you. There was no manual, no strategy. You flailed and prayed and hoped your sins were not too heavy. The sea was not something you survived. It was something you endured only long enough to confess before it took you. Consider fire itself, the tool that turned night into bearable hours. Modern rafts come stocked with flares bright enough to stain the sky red. A medieval sailor had nothing but the stars and whatever moonlight broke through the clouds. When night fell, the black pressed against them like a solid wall, and each unseen ripple could have been a monster, each brush of weed against a leg, a claw. The terror was total, uninterrupted, and unrelieved by even the smallest torch. Alone in the dark ocean, they were swallowed whole by a silence broken only by their own choking gasps. Modern medicine could treat the wound splinters piercing flesh, ribs cracked against floating timbers, infections festering in the days that followed. But even if a medieval sailor managed to cling to life for more than a day, his body would betray him soon. Salt sores would open along the skin, lips would split and bleed, lungs weakened by days of wet air would invite fevers. And there were no antibiotics, no bandages, no clean water to wash the wounds. What began as survival became a slow death sentence. The ocean may not have drowned him outright, but it had already claimed him. We like to imagine resilience, the heroic sailor refusing to quit, dragging himself onto some lonely shore after days of drifting. That is the modern fantasy, born of rescue stories, survival movies, and the mythology of the indomitable will. But in reality, the medieval sailor did not have such luxury. His world lacked the gear, the knowledge, the safety net we now treat as obvious. He was not a protagonist fighting for survival. He was flotsam. He was driftwood. In the end, the fantasy of survival collapses against the brutality of the past. A tsunami at sea in the medieval world was not a challenge to overcome, but a verdict delivered. There was no scenario where they floated long enough for a miracle rescue. No version where they limped back into port, telling the tale. The waves struck, the ship splintered, and the ocean consumed. That was the entire story. The difference between then and now is not courage, nor strength, nor the will to live. It is the thin barrier of knowledge and technology that we wrap ourselves in. Without it, we would fare no better. Strip away the life jackets, the rafts, the flares, the radios, and place us in the same sea with the same broken ship, and we too would vanish into the dark. The ocean does not negotiate. It never did. It simply waits for the moment when your illusions of survival collapse, and then it swallows you as easily as it swallowed them. The sea is older than us, older than cities and kings, older than memory itself. It waits, endlessly patient, rolling and churning long before the first ship dared cut across its surface. To the medieval sailor, it was not a highway but a chasm, not an opportunity but a test of faith. Each voyage was a wager with something incomprehensibly vast. The ocean did not negotiate. It did not promise safety. It demanded tribute in blood, in wood, in bone, and sometimes in entire communities swallowed without warning. Yet humanity still went. Fragile wooden ships set sail across waters that could snap them like twigs. Men who could not swim boarded them without hesitation, carrying saints' medals, charms, and whispered prayers, as if such talismans could restrain the tides. Fear was constant, but so was need. Fish to feed villages, salt to preserve food, trade to enrich lords, and townsall of it required someone to push away from the shore. Hunger outweighed terror, faith outweighed reason. They knew the sea could devour them, and still they went. When the tsunami came, it proved how futile those wagers were. A wall of water higher than any mast struck without warning, turning sailors, merchants, fishermen, even children into scattered debris in a heartbeat. Those left behind were forced to make sense of it. Some called it God's wrath, others the work of sea monsters, others still a punishment for sins. Meaning had to be assigned, because the alternative that the sea was indifferent, that it destroyed, because it could was too much to bear. To stare into the abyss and accept that it owed you nothing was harder than believing in divine retribution. Punishment at least carried the weight of logic. Indifference carried none, but the sea never cared. It rolled on after the wave receded, as calm and beautiful as before, glittering under the same sun that had lit the drowned men's faces moments earlier. That was the cruelest truth. Nature does not grieve. The waves do not pause in mourning. The gulls do not circle in reverence. The sea returns to stillness, erasing the evidence of what it has taken. It is humanity that mourns, not the world. And yet, out of that mourning, people built stories. They described cities swept away as divine lessons. They wrote down omens in the margins of chronicles, painted monsters at the edges of maps, and passed on tales of ghost ships that sailed forever with drowned crews. Horror became folklore. Pain became myth. It was a way to continue living in a world that did not offer comfort. The ocean's cruelty was too large to absorb directly, so it was translated into stories that could be carried and retold. Despite it all, they rebuilt. Villages reappeared where old ones had been flattened. New boats were carved and launched from the same beaches that had become mass graves. Families that had lost everything still lit fires, still planted crops, still prayed for mercy before venturing back out to sea. That cycle destruction followed by rebuilding, despair followed by persistence was the only survival they had. If the ocean swallowed you, it swallowed you. If it did not, you returned to it the next day, because there was no choice. Life demanded it. This is where the horror turns strangely human. The sea showed no mercy, but people did. They buried the dead that washed ashore. Even when the bodies carried disease, they fed the children left behind. They carved names into wood, lit candles, sang hymns, and promised to remember. Even when they knew remembering would not save them next time, they remembered anyway. That insistence to grieve, to honor, to carry forward was the rebellion against an uncaring sea. Today, we stand at a distance from that reality. We imagine survival as a skill, as something earned by knowledge, gear, or training. We build ships that resist waves, satellites that warn of tsunamis, and life jackets that keep us afloat. We think the ocean is conquered because we cross it in hours, not months. But the truth remains unchanged. Strip away the technology, and we are no different than they were. Flesh still drowns, lungs still burn, and the sea still swallows. The medieval sailor knew this intimately. He did not believe survival was a guarantee or even a likelihood. He believed survival was a gift, granted sparingly, taken suddenly, and never to be trusted. And so he prayed, not for victory over the sea, but for mercy in the face of it. He did not ask to conquer. He asked only not to be forgotten when the water closed over his head. There is a bleak honesty in that, one we have perhaps lost. We cushion ourselves with illusions of safety, but the ocean has not changed. It is still deeper than we can fathom, still vast enough to erase us without a trace. The difference is only the fragile barrier of tools we have stacked between ourselves and the water. The sea does not care about those barriers any more than it cared about saints' medals. It is not our enemy. It is not our friend. It is the sea. And so, the final reflection is simple. Humanity has always measured itself against the ocean and found itself small. Ships splinter, bodies sink, stories endure. Perhaps that is all survival has ever meant. Not conquering the waves, but outlasting them through memory, through myth, through rebuilding again and again after everything is lost. The sea always wins, but we keep returning anyway. Tonight, when you sip clean water and scroll in bed, remember if you'd lived then, the sea would have swallowed you whole.